Why didn't you? If you had as your father asked, we would have certainly lost the battle. Because I swore an oath to my king, in the north that means something. Also, because I thought, and still think, that that was the worst route we could ever have taken. Our house would have made enemies all across the north. We wouldn't have survived for 2 generations. Maybe, my father would survive and be powerful, but I and my children would be killed in our sleep, ending the Bolton line for good. Dom answered dutifully, and he couldn't fault his reasoning. The Starks, Carstarks, Marndalis and Umbers would never forgive or forget that treason. They would be surrounded by powerful enemies sworn to vengeance, and they were already on violent terms with the Hornwoods. Besides those reasons, it was a personal choice as well. You, Lord Redfort, and my Aunt Barbary have shown me more respect and appreciation than my father ever would. He didn't just ask me to betray you, he asked me to betray my family. My aunt has sent men with this army, so did my grandfather. 2 of my uncles fought in the battle, one of them dying against Lannister cavalry. He asked me to betray the cause Lord Redfort and his sons are fighting for in the Vale. He uses me like a pawn, to command or discard at his pleasure. I couldn't and wouldn't do it. I tried to reason with him, but it was clear this plan had long been set in motion. So, I did the only thing I could think of. The Bolton heir continued. Which was? He asked. I called my most trusted Dustin men over to shield me and knocked out my father when nobody could see. I told everyone he had stroke, probably due to his leeches. My men carried him off the battlefield and I took command. Before I could do anything else, the enemy was upon us, so I led the Bolton men against them. Walton Steelshanks, my father's most trusted man, tried to turn the troops against the army, but I soon disposed of him in the chaos of the battlefield. Rowan made multiple pushes against my line, clearly expecting us to give way and join him. All of this plan was prearranged, that was clear. Even so, I couldn't send word to you without the line breaking apart, and I didn't even know who the other treasonous houses were. Domeric finished his explanation. He sighed. The other houses were House Free, House Goodbrook and House Vipren and their vassals. Some of the Freys in my guard even made an attempt on my life. The Great Yon managed to subdue the Viprens in the center, but the Goodbrooks and Freys broke up our left. I only barely managed to stabilize the line by throwing all the reserves at the gap that had formed. That's why you didn't come to our aid? The young Bolton asked. I couldn't do anything in the center or the right. I stabilized the left, drew Tywin's reserves there to give you a chance, and then helped win the cavalry fight on the left. Before we could swing round, the enemy started their retreat. He answered. That explains a lot. The Reachman kept pushing us, both the cavalry on the right and our line. It was brutal. After Lord Carstark fell, Sir Willis Marndaly, Harry On and I held the line at different sections, but only with great difficulty. Dom said, as you could see the truth of it in his eyes. Once again, the grief of losing his foster father washed over him and threatened to take over. They were interrupted by the Blackfish, who probably saw what was happening to him. Reports of the battle can come later, Your Grace. The longer we wait, the more detailed they'll be. What is more pressing is what we'll do with these traitors and what our response will be towards them. We need to show the other houses that betraying our cause is a horrible mistake for them and their families. We also need to show the Lannisters and Tyrells that they made a grave mistake. This cannot go unanswered. He looked at his great-uncle and nodded. He was right, they needed to answer this. Are there any more prisoners? Yes, multiple Freys and some of their vassals have been captured together with Lord Goodbrook. Sir Brynden responded. Good. What of House Vipren? Both the Lord and his heir were killed in the fighting. We saw to that, after they killed my uncle Osric. They betrayed him and attacked him and his men in the back. He held the line long enough for my father to send troops and stabilize the front, but he and almost all of his troops perished because of it. The Viprens made sure that my little cousins Zara and Birina will grew up without a father. In response, we made sure House Vipren has died out in the male line. The Lord's 2 cousins also didn't survive the battlefield. Harmond Umber grimly declared. The man was basically admitting to murdering prisoners, but he didn't care. The Viprens got what they deserved. As he thought about the thousands of his men that had died because of their treachery, He could feel his blood boil. He could have won the war here today, instead thousands more would need to die for this to end. Good. Is there a scribe here somewhere? He called, and soon a bookish boy was brought into the tent with a bunch of paper. I want you to write all of this down on different papers for each house, he said to the scribe, who nodded and bowed. I, Robb Stark, King of the North and of the Trident, hereby declare by royal decree that House Vipren is convicted of treason. All of their lands, holdings and titles are hereby stripped from them and returned to the crown to be distributed among loyal vassals at a later date. He dictated, as he paced across the tent. Some of his nobles looked shocked at that, although most had a grim look of satisfaction upon their faces. I want you to copy those decrees for Houses Free, as well as for House Goodbrook. He then said to the scribe, who quickly picked up another paper and started writing. Who are House Free's major vassals? He asked his great-uncle. The Blackfish pondered in thought a little, before answering. House Irenford, House Hague, House Hayland and House Charlton, I believe. Thank you, uncle. He turned to the scribe once more, who had just finished the 3 initial parchments. I want you to do the same for those houses. They all fought under Lord Free and betrayed their king. I will make them pay for it. This shocked more of his nobles. Punishing a man's vassals for the choices of their overlords was not something that was often done, but he didn't care. He knew some of those like Sir Leslin Hague or Sir Lucas Hereford. They were opportunistic men without honor. The Riverlands would be better off without them. How controversial it might have been, no one spoke up. In the end, all seemed to agree that a big statement needed to be made. Now for the final parchment, it will be House Bolton. Immediately, Domeric started to protest, but he held up his hand to silence him. He turned towards the scribe, who had just taken out a new piece of parchment. The beginning will be the same, but instead of House Bolton you put Lord Roose Bolton. All of his lands, holdings and titles are hereby stripped from him and given to his heir Domeric Bolton and his descendants. Both Roose Bolton and his bastard Ramsay Snow are forever banned from the Bolton inheritance. If Domeric's line were to fail, the lands will be turned over to House Stark. He dictated. Now, he turned around to Domeric. The Bolton heir looked at him in surprise but nodded at him in understanding. Harmond, he said as he looked over to the Great Jon's second son. Will you carry Roose with us? I will go and inspect the other traitors now. His place is with them. It would be my pleasure. The young Umber grinned, as he forcefully grabbed the old Bolton by his shoulder. Lord Bolton, would you be so kind as to follow me? He asked Domeric. The man looked confused at being spoken to like that, until he realized he meant him. Of course, Your Grace. He walked out of the encampment and asked his men to bring him to where the traitors were held. After a 5-minute walk, he came to a field wherein a dozen men sat on their knees. The field was then circled by men from House Tully, an intelligent choice. He also found his other uncle there and walked over to him. Who do we have here? He asked, as he pointed to the field. 6 Freys and 1 of Lord Walder's bastards. Besides that, we have Lord Goodbrook, Sir Lucas Irenford, head of his house and his nephew and now heir and the 2 remaining Hagues, last of their line as well. Oh, and a Vance we don't really know what to do with. Lord Edmure replied. No Charltons or Naylands? He asked. No, Sir Raymond Nayland died together with his men, while Sir Geoffrey Charlton, his house's heir, died fighting Sir Mark Cox. So, all of the major free vassals betrayed us too. Then I made the right decision. He mused. Edmure looked up. The right decision? He asked. Just a few minutes ago, I passed a royal decree stripping houses free, Nayland, Charlton, Irenford, Hague, Vipren and Goodbrook from their lands. All lands are reverted to me, until a later date where they will be divided among loyal houses. He responded matter-of-factly. The Tully's bright blue eyes grew wide. You can't just do that. Those are House Tully's vassals. They are sworn. Uncle Edmure started to respond, but he cut him off. I know. Which is why we'll divide those lands together after the war. You are indeed their overlord and will have a big say in your new vassals, as is your right of course. He set his uncle at ease. Lord Edmure looked as if he wanted to say more but thought better of it. Will we present them with the news together? He asked, and his uncle nodded. They walked over to the prisoners, and Roose Bolton was dumped in the group with them. Good of you to finally show up, Bolton. Sir Hosteen Free spit out, but Bolton paid him no mind. He looked over the faces, as Lord Edmure told him their names. Sir Innes Free, Sir Hosteen Free, Sir Merritt Free, Sir Wayland Free and Martin Rivers. He named the first 5 men, until we came to 2 boys. These are Brian Free and Hoster Free, the latter is Sir Wayland's kid. Why are 2 boys in here? They can't have been more than squires. He asked. No, they were both squires. Brian here helped his kinsman kill off wounded nobles who had surrendered, so the knights could fight on. Hoster there killed Sir Demon Peage, who he was squiring for, by putting his dagger in the man's back. This gave him pause. Aye, they were boys, but those were very grave offences. He nodded to his uncle. What happened to the other phrase? All perished, most in your cavalry charge, to be honest. I know Black Walder died under the hooves of Robin Flint's horse, while Sir Ryman Free died fighting Sir Halman Peage. Many others died as well. Late Walder lost over half his adult brood in this battle. My men are making a list as we speak. We won't have to deal with so many annoying Freys any longer. Edmure Tully responded. At this Sir Hosteen spit at them. Lord Tywine will have both your heads on a pike before the year is round. He walked up towards the man and remembered his part of the family tree. Maybe, but by that time you, your son, your brother-in-law, your nephew and a dozen of your brothers will be long rotting in the ground. Most of it as a courtesy from House Umber, if I may add. Smalljon decapitated Arwood when he tried to kill me. Gratian and Harmond ended House Vipren on the battlefield. House Free lost more than you'll ever realize in this battle, but you might realize your own personal losses. Not sparing him another glance, he walked over to the other captives. His uncle once again started naming them. These are Sir Lucas Irenford and his new heir Sir Mark Irenford, as both of his sons died in the fighting. Lord Garscoodbrook sits over there. Those are Sir Hayes Haig and his youngest brother Alyn, who squired for a Free. Both their father and other brother died too. Lastly that there is Patrick Vance. He is of a minor branch of the Vances of Wayfarer's Rest. He squired for his uncle Sir Ryman and was captured after his death. He looked over all of them, before speaking up. Due to your treachery, all of your houses' lands and titles have been forfeited. Before the year is up, your houses will cease to exist. Starting with you tonight. Except for young Patrick here, all of you are sentenced to death. Once all of the nobles have been gathered, I will take your heads myself. Use the time that is left to you to repent for your sins and make peace with your gods. You will need it. He said harshly, before he turned and walked away. He blocked out the shouts and cries of the sentenced men, as he thought about the mentor he had lost due to their betrayal. Take the Vance boy out of there, we'll discuss his fate when Lord Cale gets here. He told his uncle, who looked up surprised at the news. Are you sending for Cale? I thought he was at the Golden Tooth. Aye, but we lost too many men here. We need reinforcements and we need them quick. I sent a messenger on his way already to the Golden Tooth. Lord Cale and all his men are to join us at Riverrun, while Osric Carstark and the garrison that retreated from Ashmark will take control of the castle. He responded. Good idea, we lost too many good men today. Lord Cale is reliable and will be a fine addition. Lord Edmure voiced his opinion. He knew the two were great friends and his presence would probably amplify his uncle's standing among the Riverlords. However, it was the man's troops he needed more than anything. The rest was of secondary importance. What is Bolton doing there? Edmure asked him, while some of his lords walked over to them. He tried to betray us together with the phrase but was stopped from doing so. He will receive the same treatment as the others. This shocked many of the Riverlords. Then what is he doing here? Sir Tristan Roger pointed out, as he pointed to Domeric. That's the man that stopped him and the new Lord Bolton. He simply responded. As he saw this news was met with surprise and suspicion, he elaborated. Domeric knocked out his father and led the Bolton troops in battle for our cause. Afterwards, he brought him to me for judgment. I have stripped his father of all titles and given it to him, as is his right as heir and an innocent of any plot. Domeric here is a hero, without him the right flank would have collapsed just like the left did and our army would have disintegrated. This seemed to help, although not everybody seemed convinced. It didn't matter, they would fall in line. You have acted decisively against the traitors, but what are you going to do about the Lannisters? The Blackfish asked him, who had just come back from a talk with some riverlords. I don't know yet. He responded honestly. Your Grace, if I may. Domeric asked persistently. He was obviously aware of all the suspicious glances that were still thrown in his direction. Besides, the whole situation with his father and the lordship must have confused him greatly. Yes, Dom. After the Westerling plot, you sent Tywine a warning that any other plots like that would cost the Kingslayer his life. What good is a hostage, if you don't deliver on the threat when necessary? The new Lord Bolton proposed his plan. This was met with much support from both his bodyguard and the riverlords. Wouldn't we lose our best bargaining chips with Tywine? He mused aloud. Not really, Your Grace. The Lannisters have already lost much in this war. If we execute the Kingslayer, both of Tywine's sons are dead without legitimate offspring. The lines of two of his brothers have also died out. Not many heirs of Tytos Lannister remain. Kevan Lannister's remaining sons are both in our custody, as is one of the sons of Jenna Lannister. If we threaten to take their heads next, his brother and right hand will even protest against any further plots. Those nephews will give us more than enough bargaining power against Tywine. Domeric countered. There is some truth in that, Your Grace. It would also send a clear message. Not only to Tywine to stop plotting, but also to the rest of the world that the Lannisters aren't untouchable anymore. If we can take the head of his golden son just like that, people will start to think what they could be doing. Sir Donal Locke advised him. Let the bloody lions feel what it is to lose valued family members. Harmond Umber spit out. We have lost enough for their plots of betrayal, let them feel the repercussions. Sir Lucas Blackwood responded grimly. More than understandable, as he had lost his father to the phrase. Very well, I'll have the Kingslayer brought from Riverrun. He agreed, as he saw that it was something his men needed. Besides, he had warned Tywine. How his hubris could be so high as to risk his firstborn son, he would never understand. Your Grace, allow me to get him for you to show you my loyalty. Dom asked, as he went to one knee. You have proven yourself enough on the battlefield today, Lord Bolton. However, if you wish the honor, I will grant it to you. Can you depart at first light? I will have a written order delivered to you by then. He responded. Domeric nodded in response. He spent the next hour talking to his nobles and to some of the troops. Taking care of small logical things and trying to boost morale. Afterwards many of his lords were gathered, as he delivered justice to the traitors. He first took the heads of all the Freys. After them followed Lord Goodbrook, the Irenfords and Sir Hayes Haig. Most men cursed, some cried, and Sir Innes Free stayed stoically silent. From the things they told before the execution, it was clear the Goodbrooks were promised back the lands they lost after the rebellion. The Viprens would have been given other lands, while the Freys would have been given both lands and Riverrun. Both his uncles almost took the head of the Free that dared voice the latter, but they were soon calmed as his blooded head rolled into the dirt anyway. That made that there were only two men left, Alan Haig and Roose Bolton. The first cried to him, saying he was only 13 years old and a simple squire. That he had only done his duties to his kin and the free knight he served. He was conflicted by it, and showing some mercy after taking 10 heads wouldn't be the worst thing. He looked at the boy and nodded. I grant you, and only you, the possibility to join the Night's Watch on the premise of your age. Do you accept? If the boy would have nodded any harder, his head would have likely fallen off. Get him out of here. Lord Bolton will take him with him and deliver him to the dungeons in Riverrun until he can be transported north. His last prisoner scoffed at that. Roose Bolton sat in the dirt, waiting to be brought to the block. The shadows of the surrounding torches dancing on his face. He walked over to him. Why did you do it? What did he promise you? He asked. What do you think? What Boltons have always wanted. Roose smiled. He looked at the man and it hit him. He offered you the paramountcy of the North, maybe even Winterfell. he stated matter-of-factly. Both he grinned. And both would have gone to my son and heir, if he hadn't turned out to be such an emotional weakling like his mother. I should have known. Well, I still have another son, maybe he can surprise me from the grave. Roose shrugged, clearly not caring for either of his sons. He will be able to tell you yourself. Ice will take his head too, when the time comes to go north. He responded, as he walked back to the block. He signaled some of the guards to bring him forward. The man's face was put down on the block and his ghost grey eyes pierced through him. Any last words? He asked. Our blades are sharp, Stark. I hope one of my descendants will realize what a nice pelt you and your family will make. He smiled. He brushed Ice up and let it go down in one clear swing. The head that had once been Roose Bolton rolled through the mud. After a while it stopped, its piercing grey eyes looking directly at him. Yet, they never moved again. He sighed and nodded to his lords. He went to Sir Lucas Blackwood and asked him if there was a godswood in the vicinity. Sadly, Atlanta was a complete andal castle and lacked one. To his despair, no godswoods or werewoods could be found in the vicinity. However, there was a pond in the forest not far away. He could sit there and imagine he was at Winterfell, at the very least. He turned around. Hang the bodies of those executed from trees around the battlefield. Hang every Free, Vipren, Hague, Irenford, Neyland, Charlton and Goodbrook you find next to them. He ordered. Then he walked away towards the pond, as some of his noble guard went with him. Behind them, around a dozen footmen also joined in. The next day, the bodies of his fallen noblemen had been prepared, either by their own family or the Silent Sisters, and would now be accompanied home. The price had been heavy, very heavy. What made it even worse was that the fallen Northmen wouldn't be able to return north, as the Freys blocked the way there. Their bones would go with them to Riverrun and stay there until the road to the moat was open. He looked over his fallen countrymen and felt sick. Notable losses had been Osric Umber, who had fallen due to Vipren treachery. Lord Galbart Glover, who had been stabbed by Black Walder Free, and the Forester heir, who had unsuccessfully tried to protect his overlord. Ricard Riswell and his cousin Benjen Riswell, both dying in the cavalry fight on the right. 2 cousins of Lord Flint had died, holding the line in the centre. A son of Lord Woolfield had also perished in the same endeavour. He had also lost some distant kinsmen through the line of Artos Stark. Benfred Stout had been killed in front of his eyes by Loras Tyrell, while Cregan Hornblower, Roderick Dustin's nephew, had been trampled in the cavalry engagement on the right. Even so, the biggest loss was no doubt his former foster father and father-in-law. He looked at the burial with the son of the Carstarks on it and felt rage come up. The Lannisters and their allies would pay for this. Lord Ricard had died fighting, as Rowan had made a personal push at his line. Lord Ricard and his troops had managed to stop them in his tracks, but it had cost him his life. The Carstarks got their revenge though. Harry On had personally slain Lord Virewill, while their captain of the guard, Harmond Turrell, had taken care of his brother. Afterwards, Lord Rowan had fallen against a knight in the service of House Marndaly. As he stared at the white sunburst on the black background, he realized that he didn't know how he would be able to deal with this loss, both emotionally and strategically. After losing his actual father, he had now lost the closest man to ever serve a secondary father role for him. Beside that, he feared for Alis. He didn't even dare to imagine how she would feel in Winterfell when she would hear the news. Lord Ricard had never even had the chance to meet his own granddaughter. Deep inside, he just wanted to go home and hold her and cry, but he knew Lord Ricard would never have done so and he wouldn't shame him doing so now. He would have finished what he started and now it was his turn to do so. He had to win this war, for him and all the others that had died. He had to make sure that it wasn't all in vain. If he thought the northern losses were heavy, the Riverland losses were horrible. The Freys and Goodbrooks had broken up most of the line on the left, killing many of their countrymen without quarter. Those they didn't kill were often taken down by Lannisters pushing the momentum. Besides that, some had also died in the centre, either against the Lannisters or House Vipren. He looked over all the remains and sighed. In front of him was what had once been Lord Tytos Blackwood. The man had been both loyal and competent and one of his biggest allies in the Riverlands. The only good thing about it was that he still remained on good terms with his two eldest sons, so the friendly relations between their houses would remain. Especially with one, the younger Blackwood son, still residing in Winterfell. He didn't lay alone either, as one of his nephews had also died in the fighting. Next to those of House Blackwood, were the bodies of 3 more Riverlords. Lords Biglestone, Keith and Shawnee, all dying in the fighting, the latter being joined by his heir. Of those houses, only House Keith was in fear of having a succession crisis, he had been made aware. He would soon have to discuss the issue with his uncles. Next to them, lay many an heir to a noble house. Under a flag with a pink maiden on blue was what was left of Sir Mark Piper. Next to him in a row were Sir John Leicester, Sir Tristram Wayne, Sir Bertram Cox and Sir Medric Terrick. All heirs to their houses, the latter flanked by the remains of his younger brother Sir Peter. Sir Bertram having been one of the last casualties in the battle. He died shielding him from the Tyrell bodyguard, when he charged at Laura's Tyrell. Instability in the Riverlands would be the result of the bodies that were laid out before him, he knew. One thing at a time, but he feared that if this war continued like this, that it would take years of ruling to make the Riverlands stable and prosperous once again. He walked on and saw the bodies of many notable Riverland knights. He stopped at a few of them. Sir Ellery and Sir Kurth Vance had both died protecting him and the rest of his guard, the latter at the start of the battle and the former when they had charged against the Freys. After everybody had said their respects, they would be laid to rest in the castle. The blind Lord Vance had apparently wept last night when his heir had told him the fate of his 2 youngest brothers. Further along, there was Sir Hayes Grey, the man who had slain Sir Ryman Free, Lord Walder's heir. A little further, there was Sir Damon Peage, another friend of his uncle Ed Muir. At least he had been able to avenge him, he thought as he remembered how he had taken the Free Squire's head. Too many had died, and those were only the loyal ones. For every noble that lay dead here, 2 traitors lay dead. He put his hand in his pocket and pulled out the paper he had been given this morning. It was a list of all the dead Freys. The only thing about this battle was that Lord Walder had lost so many of his brood that he wouldn't be able to send many to defend House Free from his wrath. He read the contents of the letter once more. At least the man who wrote it had been so kind as to write some of the relations on it, as no man in his right mind could know the Free family tree by heart. Nor would anyone want to anymore, but he appreciated the help. Sir Ryman Free, heir. Black Walder Free, son. Patrick Vance captured, nephew and squire. Sir Walton Free. Brian Free, son. Sir Cleos Free, son of Aemon Free and Jenna Lannister. Sir Innes Free. Sir Roriger Free, son. Sir Jared Free. Sir Titos Free, son. Sir Hostine Free. Sir Erwood Free, son. Sir Danwell Free. Sir Merritt Free. Sir Raymond Free. Sir Wayland Free. Hoster Free, son. Sir Pewin Free. Sir Benfrey Free. Sir Walder Rivers Bastard Walder. Sir Eamon Rivers, son. Martin Rivers. Ronal Rivers. Sir Theo Free, grand-nephew to Lord Walder. As he read all those names, mixed feelings came up at him. Some surprised him, like Sir Cleos Free. He must have fought for the other side, as Sir Aemon had joined his wife's family from the start. Some, like Sir Ryman, Black Walder and Sir Innes, brought him satisfaction, knowing they were dead. Others brought up no reaction at all. Yet, some he felt conflicted about. The deaths of Sir Pewin and Sir Benfrey, Oliver's 2 brothers, saddened him. The former had died whilst fighting against his kinsman, protecting his little brother. The latter had seemingly joined in the betrayal, but it had still saddened his squire. Speaking of his squire, he didn't know what to do with him. Nor did he know how to respond against House Free for now. Most of his lords wanted to march on the twins and break it down, until only the memory of it was left. They wanted to end the house, and they had a point. Most of the Freys that had died today, had sons or daughters who would want to avenge them. Leaving dozens like that alive was searching for trouble. Yet, he could not march on the twins right now, or he would risk losing the war. This war wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. For the first time, he truly feared if they even had a chance at winning this. Chapter 42, Lions, Roses and Dragons. 300 AC. Kevan Lannister. He woke up to the sound of screams. He jumped up on the bed and reached for his dagger. The weapon had been one of the last gifts he had ever received from his father Titus, one of the few gifts from him he had a practical use for. He walked out of his tent in nothing more than his breeches, the dagger in his right hand. As he looked around, he noticed the screams were coming from the east side of the army encampment. They were under attack, he realized. He ran inside his tent, picked up his sword and donned his chainmail. He had no time for the rest of his armor, so he let it lay in its corner. He ran towards his brother's tent, immediately flanked by 2 knights of his retinue. Without announcing himself, he stormed into the tent. None of the guards tried to stop him, his face very familiar to all of them. "Brother, we are under attack from the east. What are your orders?" he asked. Tywine looked at him. "It must be a small force. Their whole army could never have gotten past our scouts. Gather the household cavalry and countercharge them. Send word to Adam Marbrand, he is to gather the rest of the cavalry to assist you. I will go rally the infantry and secure the other sides of the camp. The troops need to see that I'm still in control." He nodded and stormed out. With a quick step he walked over to their personal stables. By then, many knights and soldiers sworn to either House Lannister or himself had gathered outside their tents. "Men, saddle up. We are going to beat those sons of bitches back to the hovels where they belong in," he screamed, and immediately dozens, if not hundreds, of men dressed in crimson fell in behind him. As he walked on, his commands were echoed throughout their part of the camp. By the time that he reached the stables, almost 200 men were already busy preparing their horses, with more coming in by the second. Less than 5 minutes later, he was galloping towards the east with over 400 horsemen at his back. Not for the first time, he was proud of the discipline and reaction speed he and Tywine had instilled in those soldiers. Their discipline had saved their army 7 days ago at Atlanta, and it might save the day again today. As he came closer, he heard the screams of both horses and men clearly. The sound of steel clashing on steel mixed with the dead cries of men. He had been used to these sounds ever since the War of the Ninepenny Kings, and it did nothing to him. What did worry him was the sound of fear and panicking everywhere in the air. He noticed how dozens of tents were on fire and how many of the Reachman soldiers were running from the enemy. This wouldn't do. "Men of the Reach, reinforcements have come. Help me drive these heathens back to where they belong," he screamed, trying to rally some of their allies. It seemed to work, as a few dozen stopped in their tracks. "Come, we break them now," he shouted, as he ordered his men to charge in. It wasn't long before he met the first enemy soldiers. An armored foe, wearing the colors of House Dustin, charged him. He quickly parried his attack, guiding him to his guard in the process. He didn't turn or look back at the rider, he knew the worth of his soldiers. That man would never breath again. He charged on, ordering his soldiers to fan out and push the enemy back. Next he fought a rider of House Riswell. A well-aimed strike to the back of the head was enough to dispose himself of the man, and he continued on. Suddenly 3 riders wearing Bolton colors crossed their paths. His soldiers quickly took care of them, but it still left him confused. Was it true? Did the Boltons betray them? They never turned their cloaks during the battle, although it had been clear that the enemy hadn't known of the phrase betrayal. What happened, and why were the Boltons here? He shook his head to shake away his thoughts. Thoughts like that could have you killed in battle. He charged and slashed a Stark rider across the back, his scream piercing the sky. As he looked around the encampment for more enemies, horns were suddenly blown. Almost immediately, the Northmen started retreating. He tried to pursue them for a quick moment, but thought better of it. It would be no use for him to get out with his force and get surrounded outside the camp. As such, he had his forces secure the camp. As he started going over the damage, he saw how parts of the encampment were on fire and hurriedly sent men to the nearby stream on the other side to get water. He also sent others to get some bad wine from the supplies to help. As he started organizing aid for the wounded, he suddenly noticed how there was a big commotion some 100 yards away. He signaled his guard and they rode towards it. No one could have prepared him for the sight he saw there. On the top of a tent was the body of a man. He was dressed in crimson red, but the most obvious thing was that he was missing his head. It was clear that the body had been hung there with intent by their enemies, Why, he did not know. That was until some of the soldiers got out of the way and he saw the head that was laying at the bottom of the tent. He knew that face, he realized, as the green eyes of his nephew looked straight at him. He almost fell off his horse in shock. Jamie. Why? How could they do that? He had been a prisoner. Almost immediately, his thoughts went to his two remaining sons. Both were in Stark's possession. Had they been harmed too? Would he find their bodies scattered around the encampment, just like his nephew's? Fear gripped his heart and he felt his stomach turn, as he had to push the bowl back down. Suddenly, he saw how there seemed to be some parchment stuck in Jamie's belt. He immediately shouted for his men to get the body down and demanded that his squire, a young boy of House Swyft, take the letter. His wife's little cousin got off from his horse. He got the letter as quickly as he could, taking care to not have to touch the body. After he was handed the document, he rolled it open and started reading. To his surprise, it was not only addressed to his brother but also to him. To Lord Tywin Lannister and his brother Sir Kevan Lannister. After your plan with Lady Westerling came out, I warned you that I would not tolerate any more plots and schemes from you. I wanted this war to be fought fairly as it should be, but you chose to ignore my warnings. The time when you Lannisters could do as you please without repercussions is over. Yet again, another one of your family takes the fall for your mistakes and arrogance. If you still value your family and the name of Lannister, I would recommend you stop whatever plots you are momentarily preparing. I have given orders to my men. If someone were to happen to me or my family due to any of your schemes, Martin and Willem will die in Riverrun, thereby ending the legitimate male line of Lord Tytos with the two of you. Your son Tyrion send me back the bones of my father. In return, I give you back the body of your other son. If you would care for the bodies of the men you send to free the Kingslayer from Riverrun, you are free to send a party there under a white flag. Let them be the last ones I have to return. I do not pride myself in the extinction of noble houses, but my claws are just as sharp as yours, my lord. A feat the names of Frey, Vipren and Goodbrook will forever attest to. I will not hesitate to add House Lannister to that list, even if I need to kill every blonde man, woman and child in Lannisport to do so. Do not give me any more reasons for it. Robb Stark, King in the North End of the Trident. He read the letter again and again and again. The good news was that Willem and Martin were still alive. The bad news is that they wouldn't be for long. Tywin would move everything in his power to avenge Jaime, even if it were the last thing he'd ever do. He couldn't allow that to happen. He had to save his remaining sons. They had underestimated the Stark boy at every turn. He had first proven that he could beat them in battle and that their homeland wasn't safe, now he thought them he wasn't afraid to follow up on his threats or take revenge. A few Knights of the Reach had attested that they had seen Lord Karstark go down at Atlanta. All their accounts stated that his father-in-law was one of the greatest confidants of the Stark boy. Losing him and a battle he would have otherwise won, due to treachery, must have pushed him over the edge. He looked around and he saw how everyone was looking at him. He looked over the body of his brother's favorite son and sighed sadly. He demanded the crimson cloak of one of his household guard and personally put it over the body. Just as he walked back a few steps, the masses went to the sides and Tywin walked forward. Kevan, what is this? Why are all these men standing here? He looked sadly at his brother and looked around. He shouted to all the men around them to disperse. They did so begrudgingly, as the Lannister guard set up a perimeter around them. The Stark boy had left us a message, my lord, he said, as he handed him the letter. His brother read over the content quickly, before looking up at him. It was almost as if he only noticed the crimson-cloaked form on the ground now. Without a word, he strode over there and threw the cloak from the body. His brother looked upon the body of his golden son, his body standing eerily still. His almost petrified presence looked upon it for a long time, until he finally covered it again with the cloak. Have the Silent Sisters come here at once, he ordered to a man of his household. He turned around and those pale green eyes looked into his own. However, today they looked even harder than usual. They looked devoid of any devotion, almost empty. Yet, behind that emptiness he could see storm clouds forming. This is not good. As his brother walked past him, he spoke up. Tywine, please think of my sons. I have already lost Lancel, I can't lose Martin and Willem too. His brother just looked at him emotionlessly for a long time, until he nodded and walked away without saying a word. As he looked upon Tywine's form walking away slowly, he knew. He had always loyally followed his brother in everything, but he wouldn't follow him if endangered his sons. He had a duty to his family and to House Lannister as well. His sons would need to carry on their house, they owed that to their ancestors. The lion of House Lannister could not go extinct at the hands of some wolf pup. 2 weeks later. John. He sat across from Robb, as they were once again going over the troop numbers that they themselves and the enemy had left after attacks a fortnight age. Due to his wound, he sadly hadn't been able to join that attack. Well, that wasn't entirely true. He hadn't been able to join the attack in his own body. When he took possession of Ghost, he wasn't wounded at all. As such, he had still seen the aftermath of the skirmish. The night raid had been a success. To their estimation, around 1,000 enemy soldiers had been lost. 2/3 of that in the fighting, while a few hundred others had been seen deserting the force. Some of those they had already picked off as far as 20 miles from their camp. Besides the loss in manpower, a lot of material and supplies were destroyed and their message had been delivered. Now, they had to wait what the Lannisters would do. He knew it had been a fool's hope to expect the old lion to charge everything at them in revenge, yet he hadn't been able to help himself to hope just a little bit. When no attack had come that day, they hadn't been expecting anything anymore. That night, the Blackfish had reported to them that the enemy force had been seen packing up their camp, while the vanguard had already started marching towards the east. After that, they had hampered the enemy supply lines and rear for a few days. No significant damage had been done, but every little helped in their situation. Even so, they hadn't been able to prevent Tywine from linking up with Lord Tarlis' forces. They had met each other at Stonehenge, which Tarly had taken in the meantime. In response, Robb had called all of his raiding parties back. Among those were the Crannog men under Lord Reed, who had been slowing down Tarlis' advance since before the battle. He had decided that he wanted to speak more with the man before deciding his future. The battle had been a welcome distraction from the thoughts playing in his head. Ever since, he hadn't been able to think about anything else except his parents and what this meant for him. He still didn't know if he could tell Robb, and it ate away at him, day and night. The stupid sling his arm was in didn't help either. Of all the ways to get wounded, being thrown from the saddle and spraining his elbow and shoulder was a ridiculous way to do it. At least the thing could come off in a week or so, Maester Vimen had said. Sadly, not only the raiding parties had had to retreat. The main army had needed to leave too. They had been exhausted and had lost a lot of their men. They had also lost a lot of their nobles and commanders. In most cases, there was a family member to take over command of the noble house's troops. In the other cases, command was given to a loyal captain while they were put under the wing of one of their more experienced lords. Even so, it took time for these new nobles to effectively take command, especially in some of the Riverland contingents where often almost half the remaining force consisted of wounded men. As such, they had left Atlanta 3 days after the night attack on the Lannister camp. Their march back had been slow and in bad spirits. The retreat back from Atlanta felt as a defeat to many of their troops. They had fought and died for those fields, only to give them up a week later. Yet, Robb had been right. Their army was in no position to fight a pitched battle again. They needed to rest and find a better spot to defend themselves. If Tarly arrived with 20,000 fresh and disciplined soldiers, backed up by Lannister's veterans, they were done for. There had been no other option but to march back to Riverrun. With some difficulty, they had successfully transported back the wounded and the Vance household from Atlanta. Old Lord Norbert Vance was a sad sight to see. It might be a small blessing for the man that he was blind and couldn't see himself in the mirror anymore. Old Norbert walked around aimlessly, only the guidance of his 2 remaining sons kept the man alive ever since he had lost his 2 youngest in the battle. Days after that, he had to flee with all his possessions and leave his castle to Tywine Lannister. War was a cruel game and its consequences were both gruesome and very sad to see. They had evacuated everyone from the castle, yet the damage to their lands would be extensive. The castle would most likely be sacked and burned down. It could take years to rebuild it in the state they had just left it, but there had been no other option. Back here in Riverrun they had immediately started to dig themselves in. Ditches were being dug, stakes were sharpened and units reorganized. All the while the forge worked day and night while the Fletchers restocked their arrow supplies. Rob had ordered the food stores to be opened for the army, despite protests of his uncle Ed Muir. The army needed to strengthen again, and rations wouldn't heal the wounded had been his brother's reasoning. By now, previously wounded men were rejoining the army every day. He himself couldn't wait to be in the training yard again, until then he was stuck planning the war instead of fighting it. He was awoken from his thoughts when someone knocked on the door. "Come in," his brother answered. A guard, Windle, who they had all known from back in Winterfell, entered. "Your Grace, Sir Brynden Tully is here. He says he has news for you." "Thank you, Windle. Let my uncle in," Rob replied. No sooner had he said those words, or the Blackfish brushed past the guard. The guard left and closed the door behind him. "We received words of the enemy's troop movements, Your Grace." Sir Brynden got straight to the point. Both of them tensed up now. They had been waiting for a while for the enemy to make a move. They had taken Atlanta a few days ago, yet since then they hadn't moved. It was a gift from the gods really. Every day that passed, their numbers recovered a little more while at the same time their defenses got better. Yet, they didn't know why the attack never came. This worried them all greatly. "And?" Rob asked. "They have left Atlanta, in the direction of Acorn Hall. My scouts report that their vanguard might have already taken the castle by now. So, they don't attack here. I wonder why," his brother said, as he waved his right hand through his red-brown beard. "I suspect morale problems and disagreement over command, Your Grace. The remaining Reach soldiers that were with Lord Tywine lost all of their main commanders in the past battles. Mace Tyrell, Loras Tyrell, Lord Rowan and even other lower nobles all died in the fighting, some others were captured. Their morale will be extremely low. As such, they might refuse to fight again so soon. Even more importantly, they will be looking towards Tarly for guidance, especially after Tywine's defeat against us. Tarly will be the undisputed commander of over 2/3 of the army. I don't think that will go well with Tywine, especially after all the prestige he lost. Maybe the Reachmen will even see him as the reason they lost their liege and his son. It couldn't have been anyone else's plans to split their force into 3 and afterwards to give battle at Atlanta." The Blackfish told them his thoughts. They both looked at him, as they mulled over what they had been told. "Yes, you could be right, uncle. In the end it doesn't matter. What is important is that we have some breathing room. We will keep doing what we're doing right now. Replenish our strength and build up our defenses here. They cannot defeat us, nor take the Riverlands, without attacking and taking Riverrun. Sooner or later they will need to come here if they want to defeat our force." Rob responded. "What if they don't? What if they siege the Golden Tooth or go into the West or Vale?" he asked. His brother looked at him and smiled. "That would be a grave error on their part, as that would leave the road the King's Landing open. I will gladly trade the Golden Tooth for their capital and Cersei's head. Marching against the Vale is just plain stupidity, they will never get through the bloody gate." He nodded at that. If they could take King's Landing, many houses could and would abandon the Lannisters. The war might nearly be won if they managed that. "Nothing changes then?" Sir Brynden asked. "Nothing changes." His brother nodded. The Tully Knight prepared to leave, when he was stopped by Rob. "Uncle, could you help me with something? I need advice on what to do with the Riverland houses that lost many of its members. I also need to think about solutions for the lands of Houses Free, Vipren and Goodbrook, as well as way of binding the Riverlands better together in the future. I could really use your expertise on this." The Blackfish nodded and sat down at the table, but not before pouring himself a glass of wine. He also remained seated, as he knew Rob wanted him to learn how to rule. He spent the rest of the morning listening to possible scenarios for the future of the Riverlands. He had to admit he learned a lot. Next to a lot of the history and relations between Riverland houses, he also learned more general things. how to balance the power of existing houses when dividing lands, how to raise new vassals, how to reward some and punish others, how to ensure peace between families. It had turned out to be an interesting morning. He went to have lunch with the Mandaelis after. He tried to get as much time with his former mentors and the friends he had made in their service. One of his friends, an older squire, had died in the battle. Since then, he found himself longing more for his friend's company recently, maybe it was the fear to lose others. As he walked out of the dining hall, Lord Reed walked in with two of his men. After a quick talk, Lord Howland promised to come by his rooms after breaking his fast. He went back to his rooms and spent the next hour or so writing letters. At least he hadn't hurt the arm he needed to write with, he might have gone mad otherwise. He had first finished his letters to his siblings, cousins, a small voice in the back of his mind said. Arya, Bran, Sansa and Rickon would each get a letter from him. After that, he wrote out a letter to Lord Wyman. He was just starting on letters to the rest of the Mandaeli family, when he was disturbed by a knock on his door. The guard in front of him told him it was Lord Reed. He really didn't want a guard outside his door, but Robb wouldn't give in on it. Especially now, with the possibility that Tywin would seek revenge for the loss of the Kingslayer. The small Cranogman entered his rooms and they sat down at the beech wooden table in the corner together. After he had poured the two of them a drink, he went down to business. You told me you could tell me more about my mother and about the tourney of Harrenhal. The Crannog Lord nodded, as he took a sip of his wine. I can. Let me first tell you how I met your mother and how she became the Knight of the Laughing Tree. He spent over 3 hours listening to Lord Howland. He was astonished at all the stories and the detail the man knew from the tourney. To his surprise he heard that other northern noblemen had also been present. The late Lord William Dustin, as well as Lord Harley's Hornwood, Lord Gia Mormont and his son had been present. What had most shocked him, had been the fact Sir Willis and Sir Marlon Mandaeli had been present. He never knew and decided he would speak about it with them, without telling them the reason for his questions. Lord Reed told him his mother had ridden in the tourney, defeating 3 knights to protect the Crannog Lord's honor. He told him many stories about pranks the Stark siblings pulled on each other. He described dances, meals and fights. He even told him about how he would help his father/uncle sneak out to Lady Ashura in the night. A thing Robb would definitely like to hear. It was very weird to hear, although he did nothing wrong. At the time, Lady Catelyn had been betrothed to Uncle Brandon and he had been free of responsibility. 1 week later. Robb. He sat around with his most experienced and trusted commanders. Whereas they had been in a dire position yesterday, today everything had changed. News had come that the Ironborn under Euron Greyjoy had attacked the Reach. They had taken the Shield Islands and defeated the Tyrell fleet there. After that, they had sailed towards the Ubber. He received a raven telling him they had already beaten the parts of the Red Wine fleet that had stayed home. Soon, the Ubber proper and Old Town would be threatened by them. Reports even came of small raids happening up the mouth of the Mandaya. This changed everything. The Reach had lost many of its soldiers and its forces were in no way positioned to defend their homeland. They had marched on Stannis with over 70,000 men, now only around 30,000 remained under Lord Tully. They had lost 10,000 in King's Landing and 20,000 in their campaigns against him, if you counted all the deaths, captives and desertions. 5,000 were scattered across the Crown lands and Riverlands in garrisons. Another 5,000 were stuck in the Vale, fighting for Littlefinger. A third of those 30,000 would be seriously demoralized. It was reasonable to assume Tully had gotten this message a lot earlier. This might be another explanation why he didn't attack Riverrun. Ever since they had taken Atlanta, they had burned Acorn Hall to the ground and were moving south now towards the Stony September. They had raised Acorn Hall and a score of lesser holdfasts and towns on their way there. By now, the city must have fallen. It didn't have the strength to put up a serious defense. He hoped they would just surrender, to spare them another sack like they had in Robert's rebellion. Too many people had already died in this war, no more senseless deaths were needed. He, and the men around him, had spent the last few weeks reforming their army until it was again somewhat in fighting shape. What do we do now? Sir Willis Mandaeli asked. We should march out and reclaim back our keeps. Retaking our lands will raise the morale of all the Riverlanders, nobles and common soldiers alike. Lord Deddings proposed understandingly. His keep and those of his neighbors had been sacked by the enemy. He was supported in this by many of the other riverlords, however he could not allow this. No, we can't. If we do so, we could either be picked off one by one or not in the shape to deal the killing blow when it presents itself. For now, the army must stay here together. He ordered, to the dismay of many of the Riverlanders. We must wait to see what Tarly does. The march south indicates that Tarly might be going home to defend the Reach. If so, Tywin Lannister will be weak and ready for the taking. Two possibilities will be most likely. He continued. Which are? Harry asked. He looked at his brother-in-law, before looking around the table to the rest of his commanders. 1. He marches back into the Westerlands to get reinforcements. If that happens, we reinforce Riverrun and the Golden Tooth and march straight for King's Landing. If the gods are good, the city will have fallen before Tywin can do anything about it. 2. He marches back towards Harrenhal or the Crown Lands. In that case, he won't be able to get reinforcements, other than a few mercenaries. In this scenario we will confront him in battle. Most of his lords looked surprised at this, but it was the only thing that made sense. Without the Reach, Lannister would have never been able to keep up this campaign. If they were to leave, he could defeat him. He had already proven that he could beat him one-on-one and no tricks would be used this time, or he would end the line of Tytos Lannister. So, we wait for Tarly to leave. After which we attack either the Old Lion or his last remaining cubs. The Great Jon grumbled. And then we end this war for good. He concluded, which lifted the atmosphere in the room. For now, keep doing what you are doing. A lot of the wounded have already rejoined the force. Supplies of food and weapons are almost restocked. Discipline and morale are returning to the army. If we keep this up, we will again be able to outclass the Lannisters on the field. Besides, reinforcements are coming. Robert Glover is making his way south with 2,000 fresh northern soldiers, all are veterans of the Battle of the Green Fork and the fighting against the Ironborn. Together with them, a few hundred fresh soldiers will be joining us from houses Mallister, Peage and Blackwood. This will again take the army to well over 20,000 men. He summarized the situation. This was met with support from his lords. A month ago, their situation had been dire. Soon, they would have turned this around and they could once again go on the offensive. What about the twins? It lays between Robert's army and Riverrun. Sir Donal Locke asked. He is ordered to take it. The Mallisters, Blackwoods and Peages will hold the western riverbank, while Robert holds the eastern bank. They block the castle and siege it out, if they can't storm it. I don't care about how long it takes. He is to bring justice to Walder Free and his brood, before joining us here. He stated matter-of-factly. Now, he received the full support of his lords. Many of them banged their cups on the table as they shouted their agreement, while others called for the heads of House Free. He finished the meeting once the commotion died down. He prepared himself to go to his solar, as he wanted to write another letter to Aelys. Yet, as he wanted to leave, he realized Jon had remained behind. What is it, Jon? He asked him. I have something important to talk to you about, Robb. Do you have any time? His brother asked. He looked a lot less sure of himself than he was used to nowadays. It reminded him of how he would react to his mother when they were younger, before any of them went on to foster. He was taken aback a bit by this reaction and realized this needed to be important. Of course, I was just about to go to my solar. Why don't you join me? We can talk over there. His brother nodded but remained silent. He gathered the rest of his maps and documents, and they walked out towards the solar. The walk was spent in silence and he started to fear for what Jon would tell him. Had something bad happened? Had he done something wrong? The first thing that came to mind was if Jon had managed to get some Riverlander girl pregnant. Him having his own bastard could warrant this reaction. Yet, he had never even seen his brother with a girl, let alone be told anything. They discussed almost everything, so he was at a loss what this could be. Although, coming to think of it, he had been more silent these last weeks than usual. They entered the solar and he took a little time to put all his things away. He gestured for John to take a seat on the other side of the desk and sat down when he was ready. He looked at his brother and took a deep breath. "What is it you have to talk to me about, John?" His brother looked at him for a long while, before finally starting to speak. "I have heard some things from Lord Reed. Some things you should know." "What about?" he asked. "It's about our father, about House Stark, about my mother, about me," John responded. "About House Stark? Why wasn't he told about this? He loved his brother to death, but it was he who was the head of House Stark, not John." He wanted to voice as much, but the vulnerability in his brother's eyes and voice made him pause. Then he realized what was said. About his mother. John knew who his mother was. He looked into those dark grey eyes and he knew then. He had to be there for him. He softened his features and asked emphatically, "Who was she?" John looked at him. It was a panicked look. It looked like fear. That couldn't be right, could it? John couldn't be afraid of him. He nudged his brother to start talking, and finally he did. "Lord Howland told me who my mother was, and who my father was." "Who your father was? We know that already, why would he need to tell you?" he interrupted. John looked at him sadly. It was as if he wanted to cry. Yet, he didn't. Those grey eyes just pierced into him with a deep sadness. "Because what we know isn't true. Lord Eddard wasn't my father. He only told the world that to protect me." He stared at his brother for multiple seconds, not understanding what was being told. John was his brother, had always been so. What was this madness? "Say, I believe you. Why in the world would our father lie about that?" he asked, putting emphasis on the "our." He was known as one of the most honorable men in the realm. "You tell me he lied to the world, to his friends, his wife and his children about having a bastard son? That he would hinder his marriage like that, and for what?" He kept firing questions. This seemed completely insane and he didn't believe a word of it. "He did it to protect me. If he hadn't, I would be long dead by now. I would have been killed before I would have learned how to walk," his brother responded softly. "You would be dead." "Dead how? Who in his right mind would kill a child?" he called out. "Robert Baratheon. Tywin Lannister, maybe. The Martells if I was really unlucky, but I suppose I am. Some of them did it before, they would do it again." John replied, and the way he said it gave him a cold feeling. It felt like ice suddenly started running through his veins. "Why would they want to kill you? What are you trying to tell me, John? Who was your mother? Why are you saying that father isn't your father?" he asked, not understanding any of these riddles. A long pause happened, as John looked down. It seemed as if he didn't want to meet his gaze. When he finally did, he spoke. The words he heard shocked him to his very core. "My mother was Lyanna Stark. I'm saying Lord Stark wasn't my father, because he was actually my uncle. He and Lord Howland found me and my mother in Dawn, at the end of the rebellion. My mother died in the birthing bed of a fever and made Lord Stark promise to protect me. Lord Reed and Lord Stark spent a long time discussing how, until it was decided your father would claim me as his own bastard, and so he did." His mouth fell open and he looked at his brother in disbelief. You can't be serious." "Sadly, I am, Rob." The answer came. He tried to come to grips with what he had just learned. If this were all true, which he couldn't believe, that made John his cousin instead of his brother. It would also mean that John had spent years living in a lie. That his mother had given him a rough time for no apparent reason. If he was Aunt Lyanna's son, and not father's, he finally knew who his mother was. Yet, the equation remained the same. Who was his other parent? Who was his father? If this is true, do you know who your father is? Do you know why he would need to protect you? He finally asked. Yes I do. John responded. His voice still sounded sad, but there was something else there too. It sounded like insecurity, or fear maybe. And my father was Rhaegar Targaryen. The reason Robert Baratheon or Tywin Lannister would want to kill me is simple, because I was a threat to their reign. I could have been a claimant of the Iron Throne. I still could. Jon answered. What? Was all that came out of his mouth. I am the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. I am actually your cousin, and as long as I live, I remain a threat to everyone sitting on that damned iron chair. Which means that if anybody knows, I will be hunted down till I die. Jon said, a weird form of sad acceptance in his voice. How is that possible? He asked, but he instantly regretted it. He knew the stories of his aunt Lyanna. She was kidnapped by Prince Rhaegar. He must have forced himself upon her. That meant Jon was a child of rape, one of the worst fates possible. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I know you wouldn't want to talk about what Rhaegar did to Aunt Lyanna. Please forgive me. He tried to apologize. What Rhaegar did to my mother? What do you? Oh, you mean you think he raped her? No, he didn't. Lord Howland told me the truth of it all. Jon answered. What do you mean? What did he tell you? He asked. My mother ran away with Rhaegar. They married under a half-tree around the God's Eye. She was never kidnapped. She went willingly. I have proof of it too. Lord Howland brought with him the marriage contract. His brother answered. You have a marriage contract? Are you telling me they married? He exclaimed. Yes, first under a half-tree at the God's Eye. Later on, they also married with a septon. I have the marriage contract they made with the septon here with me to show you. Jon clarified. He reached for his bag and got some documents out of it. He handed them over and he took a look at them. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Targaryen, he read. On the last page, it was signed by his aunt and Rhaegar, but also by two Kingsguard members. Sir Oswell Wentz and Sir Arthur Dayne's signatures were on the document as well. Everybody knew the reputation of the latter, while the former was some distant kin of his through his maternal grandmother. He looked up towards Jon. This means that you're trueborn. If this is true, you have never been a bastard. Although many won't see it that way. Rhaegar had been married before, so most of the seven will never accept it. The answer came. But, you tell me he was married before Weirwood the second time. If I remember correctly, he wasn't the first time. He asked. His brother nodded in response. That changes things. A vow taken before the gods can't be brushed aside, even if it conflicts with another vow. Especially when the earlier vow was made to different gods. Most of the Northmen will agree with me. They won't like this, they won't like it one bit, but the marriage will stand in their eyes. He saw the fear creep up again in those grey eyes, so he decided to try to cheer him up. Your actual name is Jon Targaryen. I have to say that it doesn't sound as good as Jon Snow did. His brother looked at him. Well, my name isn't actually Jon apparently. What? It's not. What is it then? He asked. My actual name is Jaehaerys. Father, I mean Lord Stark, decided that a Targaryen name for his bastard wouldn't work, so he changed it into Jon. He kept the first letter, I guess. His brother shrugged. Jaehaerys. He tested the sound. It suits you. He finally admitted. How do you know all of this? How do you know Lord Howland speaks the truth? Because he gave me a letter from Lyanna. It was signed with Lyanna Targaryen and addressed to her son Jaehaerys. It was addressed to me. He also gave me her necklace and a ring Rhaegar had apparently left for me wrapped in a Targaryen banner. It's too much to deny, Rob. It's true. Jon replied, letting out a sigh at the end. He let that sink in. His brother was actually his cousin. His father had lied to all of them, especially his mother, to protect his nephew from the likes of Tywin Lannister after he swore an oath to his sister. He could see him do that. His bastard brother was actually his true-born cousin and the heir to the Targaryen cause. His head began spinning when he put it like that. What are you going to do now? Do you want to claim your family's seat back? Are you going for the throne? I mean, I know some would probably support you like Daeari, Mutan, Rhaegar. Maybe the Valerius and Celtigars will even switch to your side. He thought aloud, as he started to think of the political implications of all of this. Rob, stop, please. I know you might not want anything to do with me anymore, but please if you will have me let me stay. John begged. What? Was all that came from his lips once more. He didn't understand where that was coming from at all. Why would he not want him anymore? Think about it, Rob. My grandfather killed yours and Uncle Brandon. The whole rebellion was a lie. The great John's cousins, Sir Marlon Mandela's father, Clee's grandfather, all of them died for nothing in a war that was about a lie. I am the product of that lie. If the lords would know, they would cast me out. I wouldn't be welcome in the north ever again. You shouldn't welcome me ever again. John explained, and now he understood the fear he had been seeing in his eyes all of this time. He thought he and the northern lords would abandon him. Well, you might be right about some of them. However, times are changing. As you might recall, Clee never even met his grandfather. There are many others like him. Besides, the Mandelas love you and they adored Aunt Lionel. I doubt this news will change anything for them. Neither will it change anything for me. He responded, as he looked into those dark grey eyes. It might be his paranoia speaking, but in the glimmer of sunlight he might have sworn they almost looked dark purple for a second. It might be true that father took you in and lied about your birth to protect his sister's son, but it doesn't matter. He raised you as his own. He raised you as a member of House Stark, which you still are through your mother's line. He loved you as his own son, and all of us love you like a sibling. You being our half-brother or our cousin doesn't matter. All the time we spent together stays the same, those memories remain. To me, you will always be my brother. If it so happens that we only share the same grandparents, and not the same father, so be it. I don't care. About that though, how would I judge you for grandfather's and Uncle Brandon's dead? They were as much your grandfather and uncle as they were mine. More importantly, neither of us were even born at the time. Blaming you for that is moronic. He proclaimed seriously, shrugging at the end. It was true, blaming an unborn baby for that, who had nothing in common with those people except a name, was the stupidest thing he ever heard. His brother looked at him in shock. He opened his mouth a few times to speak, but it closed it again before any words came out. He rolled his eyes at that reaction. Truly, he felt sorry for him. He must have been eating himself alive for the last couple of weeks. However, it was his own dumb fault. Did he really think we would just dump him because of this? He was more offended than anything that his brother thought so lowly of him. As he still refused to speak, he just repeated his earlier question. So, are you going for the throne or not? John stared at him, before replying. No, I don't want that damned chair or any title that comes with it. All I would want are some of the possessions of Roriger. Some of his letters and books, as I would like to try and understand him. He might have been mad, but I would like to check that for myself. Sadly, all of that information will have been burned by the Baratheons and Lannisters long ago. You don't want to clean Roriger's name and re-establish his dynasty? He asked once more. No, his brother replied. If I could choose, all I would want is to remain in the north. Maybe I would like to have a keep, a wife and a family for myself someday. Some quiet lands to look after, while still feeling at home in the north and being close to you and our siblings. What would I be doing in the south? I know nothing about their way of life. I don't even believe in their gods. You know, those gods that are necessary for the ritual coronation. Besides, if the stories are true, half of King's Landing doesn't exist anymore anyway. He looked at John. You are saying that you would like to keep this quiet? I told you because you are my best friend and my king. However, if I could help it, I wouldn't tell another soul. John admitted. I'm not only your best friend and king, John. I am also your brother. He immediately responded, as he walked over towards the other side of the desk. He gagged his brother in a fierce hug then, as he had seen he needed it. They hugged for a few seconds and, when they broke off, he could see it had helped. Oh, about that keep and that future wife of yours. He grinned. John responded. That can be arranged. He laughed. His brother looked at him weirdly, before his eyes went wide. Really, John? Don't you try to start. There is no one that would deserve the reward more than you do. You have led the men when I was wounded, quite successfully too. You punished bandits and commanded parts of the army in battle. Besides that, you are my brother. No one will blink twice if I decide to reward you with some lands in the north. After I do that, the lords will be lining up to marry you to their daughters, so that will take care of your other request too. He responded, as he rolled his eyes at his brother's naivety. He would have rewarded him anyway, now he just knew what to give him. Are you serious? John asked him. Of course, I am. He almost shouted, trying to hold his laughter. For all his intelligence, the guy really was clueless sometimes. Look, come here, he ordered, as he walked back behind his desk. He opened a drawer and picked up a map from the north's Sunset Coast. His brother slowly followed him and looked over his shoulder. He let his finger wander over the western coastline, from the mountains to the rills. I have been planning to raise new lords here for a while now. It will have to wait until after the war, but I will do it. The fact that there was no one to oppose the Ironborn is unacceptable. I would change that in the future. I have been going over possible candidates and possible places where to build keeps. He looked at his brother. In fact, you are doing me a favor. There is no one more capable and loyal than you. By giving some of the lands to you, you are actually saving me from a major headache on how to balance the local houses against each other. John looked at him for a while, until he suddenly grabbed him in another hug. Thank you, Rob, he heard in his ear. Thank you, he heard whisper again, as he felt something wet drip onto his shoulder. Chapter 43, The Vale. 300 AC. Jon Royce. He stood in his command tent, as he looked over the maps of the terrain. These were his lands. These lands had belonged to House Royce since before the coming of the Andals. He would not lose here. He would make sure of that. Around him stood the other commanders of the gathered force. He looked at them, as he thought about the choices he had made for the upcoming battle. Lord Horton Redfort would lead the right flank. The short, but veteran, Lord would rather die than have his men break the line. The man had lost one of his sons, Sir Creighton, in the war. His thirst for revenge would fuel their troops in the upcoming battle. Next to him stood Sir Simon Templeton. The cold and calculated look in his eyes was exactly what they needed in this battle. He would do well commanding their left flank. Lord Gilewood Hunter would command the vanguard. The son of his late friend Eon had learned much and more from his father. He would not fail them, he knew that. Yet, his eyes still lingered on him. His brothers accused him of killing Lord Eon, a most vile act. Even so, his sources told him this was most likely false. If anyone had, it would most likely have been one of his brothers. As such, he had ordered some of his men to keep an eye on them. The reserves would be commanded by Sir Morton Waynwood. The heir to Iron Oaks had distinguished himself in the Battle of the Bloody Gate, even freeing his younger brother Sir Donal after the battle. The latter had stayed with his mother to keep the Eyrie under siege with 1,500 men. Sir Morton's eldest son Sir Roland was the best friend and constant companion of Lord Harold Arryn, formerly Hardime. There were worse friends for the new Lord of the Vale to have than the future heir of House Waynwood. Lord Harold himself was also present. He would serve as his second-in-command in the centre. Although showing much promise, the young lord was inexperienced. All men present here had agreed that it would be too dangerous for him to lead the army today. To placate their new liege, Lord Arryn was promised overall command after they had won the battle. That way, the man could still gather the glory he deserved after the battle in the, hopefully, easier fights that were to come after this. This meant that Ander, his son and heir, couldn't be his right hand in the upcoming battle. He felt for his son, who had also proven himself in the previous engagements. Together with Lord Horton, he had soundly defeated House Waxel. After that, he had also fought in the Battle of the Bloody Gate, where he had personally managed to kill Sir Arnold Egon, Sir Vardis' cousin and second-in-command. After much deliberation with his fellow lords, Ander had been given command of the surprise cavalry attack they would be implementing. He had had to give Sir John Redfort and Sir Gerald Templeton the most prestigious commands under his son, but that had been quickly accepted. If everything went as planned, songs would be sung of his son's charge for decades. The only man that was notably absent was Lord Benedar. The head of House Belmore had been defeated by the combined strength of houses Linderley and Corbray up north. The messages they had received told of Benedar being wounded, while his nephew Sir Marwyn had been killed. For a while, they had feared that the armies of the Linderleys and Corbrays would come south to try and break the siege of the Ury, but at that time they had finally received help. Ned's young son had come true and had sent some of his vassals under the Marndalis to help them. Their fleet had sunk the one of House Sunderland, after which the Vale's northern shores laid open to them. Not long after, they had captured Sisterton. They managed to kill or capture all of Lord Tristan's 7 sons in the process of those 2 battles, effectively knocking the 3 sisters out of the fight. After regrouping there, the Northmen had captured the Paps and Pebble. These islands were the seats of houses Elsom and Prior, who had been menacing House Coldwater and effectively denying them the possibility to link up with House Belmore. His vassal, Lord Royce Coldwater, had been killed in one of their raids. The man had been his late wife's brother and one of his most trusted advisers. Revenge for his death had come as most welcome news. The most significant accomplishment of those island houses had been the fact that they had managed to keep the other houses in the area neutral. House Donijah had shown sympathy for their cause yet hadn't joined them out of fear of being the target of some of these raids. With that threat dealt with, they might be more easily persuaded to join them. From their bases on these islands the Marndalis had done much more than he had expected. They had started raiding the coast themselves, forcing the Linderleys and Corbrays back to defend their lands. They didn't allow those houses to march on the Ury, which was the only reason this army had managed to gather here in his lands. The Northmen had also managed somewhat of a moral victory. Word had come that Sir Roderick Locke had burned down the lands of House Baelish. Their old tower, as well as the village nearby, had been burned to the ground, leaving nothing of his holding intact. While its military importance was negligible, it had been a huge moral boost for their soldiers. Not only had the Northmen come to help, they had burned down their enemy's ancestral home. Already, his men had started calling Baelish Little, instead of Littlefinger. When he had asked one of his captains why they did so, the man had grinned back at him. Because he has lost his lands on the fingers, my lord. All that remains true of the name is the fact he is small, or little. Morale was high and his battle plans clear. Now they had only to wait for the enemy. Baelish didn't disappoint him. Less than half an hour later trumpets were heard in the distance and all of the commanders present walked out of their tents. The enemy had come over the hill in the distance, just as he had anticipated. All the lords around him quickly went to their troops, as the army sprang into action. He walked over to his son and hugged him fiercely. "You will do us proud, my boy, I know it. Now be quick and take only a few retainers with you. Ride to the east side of the camp, where it meets the trees, and ride around in a long circle to your men from there. We don't want you to be spotted." His heir smirked at him, as he pulled away from the hug. "I know, father. I will do as you asked. Don't worry, this isn't my first battle. Besides, I have a wife and 3 daughters that expect me home safely. I will not disappoint them, nor you. Tonight, we feast on the final defeat of that bandit Baelish. We will not only restore the Vale to the Arins tonight, we will also avenge Robar." His son said, and it was clear he meant every word of it. The mention of his late son steeled him, as cold anger crept upon him. For weeks they had asked themselves how he could have died, until it had finally become clear that the Lannisters still controlled the city watch. Those lowly Goldcloaks had betrayed Ned and his son, and there were only a few men who could have orchestrated that. The most likely culprit of it all was in front of him, nominally leading the enemy army. Whatever the case, they would make sure their deaths weren't for nothing today. He donned the bronze helmet of his forebears and walked over to his horse. A few minutes later he rode towards the front line that was establishing itself in the center. Lord Harold followed him like a shadow, like he had been ordered to do. They needed the Vale to be stable in the next few decades. A bit of lessons in warfare would do the young lord a lot of good. He rode up and down the line, as more and more soldiers formed up. He let them see their commander. He let them see that he was here with them and that he wasn't afraid. Lords Royce and Arryn would fight with them, and they had to see this. From time to time, he shouted some encouraging word. Lifting the fighting spirit of his men up for the coming battle was an important part of leading them. More often than not, These battles were fought until one side started running away, not until it was beaten. Every once in a while, he looked around him to make sure the army was forming up like he had envisioned. He also checked the advance of the enemy army that was slowly marching towards him. His scouts had told him the total enemy force numbered around 12,000 men. 5,000 reachmen under Lord Ashford, 4,000 sellswords from Essos and 3,000 valleymen under Lords Grafton, Breakstone and Upcliffe. The latter ones had once had a lot more men, but they had lost hundreds in the constant skirmishes against him, he remembered with pride. The reachmen would be the easiest to deal with, he thought. Tyrrell would never have sent his best men to the Vale, as was clear by the command of the previously unmemorable Lord Ashford. The sellsword would be tougher. They were veteran troops from many Essos campaigns. Yet, they had one weakness. Like all sellswords, they fought for coin. Every man likes the idea of fighting for coin, yet few like dying for it. If the tide of the battle turned against them, the sellswords would surely flee. The toughest to beat would be the valleymen, veterans of numerous skirmishes over the last year. All of them knew what defeat would bring them, the block or the wall. It was the same for his men. Whoever won could decide the identity of the new lord in and punish the other side as traitors. Approvingly, he looked upon his army, which had completely formed up by now. 10,000 men, a third of them of House Royce. He trusted these men with his life and the future of the Vale. They would not fail him. Of course, not all of them were here. Ander would by now have joined with the 800 elite mounted knights and lancers, who had hidden themselves in the woods to the east. The restless minute before the battle that commenced was the same as it had ever been. It'd been the same in all the battles he had fought in, and by now those were many. He had fought many battles on the Stepstones during the War of the Ninepenny Kings under the lordship of his father and Lord John. He had been a young lad then, too young for knighthood even. During Robert's Rebellion he had been much older and commanding his house's troops himself for the first time, while the Greyjoy Rebellion felt like yesterday still. That one restless minute before the arrows flew and the trumpets glared was always the same. Be it on Bludston, the Trident or Pike, all you heard was horses neighing, men breathing and banners flying in the wind. It was the same here, and the sounds came to him as if he was an old friend of them. When he felt things would commence, he closed his visor. Barely a few seconds later the trumpets sounded, followed by arrows flying through the air from both sides. He raised his shield, but none fell near him for now. After a few volleys were exchanged, the enemy started moving. He had purposely given them the initiative. They needed to think they had them on the ropes. They had to commit everything, only then would his plan work. Soon the lines were joined. He started shouting his orders across the line, his booming voice not disappointing with age. Lord Harold had taken his place with his guard on the other side of the centre, having received clear orders beforehand on what to do. After a while, the lines broke down and a bloody melee ensued in the middle. This was the time for him to commit. He rallied the remainder of his centre towards the fighting, after which he and his household knights charged in too. The first men he killed had stood no chance. His lance hitting him below the clavicle, piercing the side of his lung. He left the lance with the body, as he knew it was no use trying to pull it back out. He pulled out his sword and charged on, hitting an Ashford man-at-arms on his helmet. Whether the man had survived or perished from the blow, he knew not. Yet, he wouldn't fight any more today, that was sure. Soon they had reached the center of the melee and he started swinging left and right at men too numerous to count. Slashing, parrying and counter-attacking many an enemy. After a while, a knight, wearing the colors of House Ashford, charged at him with a retinue. The knight was too young to be the lord, but that didn't stop him from trying to kill him. The axe the knight used hacked away one of his footmen, before it swung towards his head. Prepared for this, he ordered his horse to circle around and caught the swing on his shield. His counter-strike harmlessly slid from the knight's steel armor. They started circling around each other, as both tried to find a weak spot. Many blows were exchanged, until suddenly he found what he was looking for. Every time the knight raised his shield to block an overhead slash, he let his sword arm hang. This greatly exposed the elbow and lower arm to a strike. After exchanging 3 more blows, he again went for an overhead slash. Yet, this time he changed direction at the last minute, hitting the knight just above the wrist. The man's steel armor was the only thing that made sure his wrist didn't come off. Even so, the impact made him drop his axe fall to the ground. Cursing was heard from behind the enemy visor, as he rode past him. He suddenly turned around in an exercised swing, hitting the wounded knight on the head. The blow was enough to make sure he fell from his horse. He quickly ordered a soldier to go check on him and take him hostage if he was alive. The knight had seemed important after all, and a good ransom wouldn't hurt anyone. He rode on, helping his household knights deal with the remainder of the enemy's retinue. A while later, he looked around from the top of his horse as trumpets had been sounded. He saw how the enemy reserves were moving towards their right. They were trying to break the right flank and envelop the army. Lord Horton would hold for now, but he wouldn't be able to hold forever. If Ander didn't arrive soon, the battle was lost. He again threw himself in the battle, splitting an enemy footman's skull right before the man could finish one of his own men at arms off. He searched for Lord Harold and guided his guard there. If Lord Harold were to die, their cause would be lost. They linked up with the Arryn retinue and together they held off all possible attackers. After a few minutes another set of trumpets was heard above the sounds of the fighting. This time, they brought the signals that had been given to Ander. He grinned, as he knew his son had come through. He couldn't think on it anymore, as another footman tried to pierce him through with his spear. He knocked the spear away with practiced ease and forced his horse to turn. The following slash cut through muscle and flesh, as the man's throat was opened. Blood spattered on the flank of his horse and on his leg, but he didn't care. In the next minutes, the battle changed. The enemy right collapsed, followed by the encircling of the enemy center. Soon many of the reachmen started surrendering, realizing the day was lost. Seeing this, the enemy's left flank and reserve started to retreat. Not willing to allow them to retreat to Gulltown safely, he gathered all horsemen he could find and charged at them. As he went behind the lines for the first time, he saw his son had had the same idea. His elite cavalry unit charging was barreling towards the retreating enemy archer line, so he himself set course for the retreating sellsword companies. He barreled into their rear with around 100 cavalrymen, inflicting many losses. Eventually they had to pull out or risk losing too many of his own troops in the fighting. They rode over to his son's force and regrouped together. After a quick conversation, they decided to immediately take the enemy camp with their combined strength. They couldn't risk the enemy funds and provisions getting back to Gulltown safely. Knowing Littlefinger, he would just hire another army in Essos with it. Their hundreds of cavalrymen rode towards the camp. As they neared it, they saw dozens of men starting to flee in the distance. Some clearly had valuables with them, while others only sported the clothes on their backs. It didn't matter. They had to secure the camp first and deter the retreating enemy to camp back for it before thinking of running any of them down. They rode through the opening in the palisade and met nearly no resistance. A few suicidal soldiers charged at them, but most of the few stragglers they encountered simply surrendered. He tasked Ander with securing the camp, while he and his guard raced for the command tent. When they arrived there, they found a few chests with gold and precious materials. Yet, no trace of Littlefinger could be found. It was clear he had fled early, as some chests were obviously missing. As they looked more around the central tents, it dawned on him he might not have taken any valuables. Barely any plans were found here and all sellsword contracts also seemed to be missing. What was that cockroach planning? Still, the valuables they found were nothing to laugh at. Even if he split it equally, with houses Redfort, Waynwood, Hunter and Templeton, a small fortune still awaited his house. Today was a good day, for House Royce and for the Vale. 2 weeks later, they had finally surrounded at Gulltown, after many months of fighting. His men hadn't hesitated and eagerly encircled the city for the past week. For the second time in less than 2 decades, his troops would take the ancestral castle of his family's rivals. The first time had been with Jon Arryn and Robert Baratheon, the second time would have to be with Jon's grandnephew Harold. The city itself was tightly packed with soldiers. Around 4,000 of the enemy force had made it back to the city safely. Most of them had been sellswords or had been in the reserves. Another 2,000 men were scattered, while 6,000 of them had been killed or captured. Notable casualties had fallen on both sides. They had sadly lost Sir Gerald Templeton, Sir Simon's younger brother, as well as Sir Eustace Hunter and young Sir Wallace Wainwood. The latter had died protecting his liege and cousin Lord Harold and would be remembered for his bravery and sacrifice. On the other side, Sir Edmund Breakstone, the heir to the castle of the same name, had died during the fighting. The Ashford knight, he himself had killed, had apparently been Lord Ashford's son and heir. Lord Ashford himself, together with his brother and second son, had been captured. Other captives from the Reach included landed knights Sir Luther Rodden and Sir Eden Rizzle. Sir Jasper Upcliffe, heir to his house, had been captured while his younger brother Sir Benedict Upcliffe succumbed to his wounds after the battle. Besides that, one of the 3 mercenary captains had also been killed. His company scattering across the countryside in response. All in all, it had been a very successful battle. He had sent Lord Houghton Redfort with his sons and troops to hunt for the scattered enemy troops with the final objective of capturing Breakstone. Houghton had already sent word that he had rounded up over 400 of them and would be at Breakstone in a week. If you discounted the dead and the wounded, who they had sent back to one of his own border towns, they had some 7,000 men left. Not enough to assault the castle, but more than enough to start sieging it. The Redforts would return in a few weeks, after they had finished their task. Mostly he counted on neutral houses joining him. By now, it should be clear to all in the Vale who was winning this conflict. Houses Arran, Egan, Breakstone, Waxhall and Grafton had lost the majority of their troops, while the houses Sunderland, Elisham and Prior had even lost their keeps. With both the Ury and Gulltown under siege, other houses would start joining. They would either be scared of the consequences if they didn't join or simply be out for easy rewards and glory. Many had remained neutral. The most notable among the houses that had remained silent had been houses Dutton, Donisier, Lupes, Melcombe and Ruthermont. Yet, now they would be forced to choose a side. Already letters had come in from houses Donisier and Lupes, pledging their allegiance to Lord Harold. The others would soon follow. Once the troops of the Lupes, Melcombes and Ruthermonts got here, Gulltown was finished. Until then, they just had to sit tight and hunt for the scattered survivors. In the meantime, they had already begun discussions about what to do with the survivors. Any captured SOZ sellswords would be executed. They had already hanged 200 of them after the battle. Hopefully that would teach them to think twice about interfering in Westeros ever again. Captured Westeros sellswords would be sent to the war. The Starks had been quite adamant on the need for new recruits. Besides, these mercenaries had been raiding all through the Riverlands with Tywin Lannister, before coming here to loot the Vale. Better to send them away than to let them live and come back another day. Thoughts of the wall made his mind go to his youngest son Sir Waymar. Word had come 2 years ago about his disappearance and nothing had changed. It was all but sure that he had lost his son to a wilderling attack. He had beaten himself up many times over the idea that sending Waymar to the wall may not have been the right decision. Alas, nothing he could do about it now. The Reclords would be kept for ransoms and maybe to help the Starks treat with the Tyrells. It was the least they could do for their help. The Vale Lords had been the cause of much discussion. Many had taken to the example of Jon Arryn, who had allowed Lyn Corbray to bend the knee after the Battle of Gulltown. After that the knight had distinguished himself on the Trident. Yet, he had pointed out to them that Sir Lyn was yet again fighting them today. This had managed to convince many, among them Lord Harold. The traitors and their houses would be punished, yet not too severely had been agreed. The heads of all the houses that fought against them would be sent to the wall, yet their heirs would be allowed to retain most of their families' lands. All houses on the mainland would lose a small portion of their territory, nothing more than a few villages to teach them a lesson. All of those would be divided amongst loyal houses nearby. The island houses would have to suffer the consequences of their northern occupation until the end of the war, which was likely to consist of looting everything of value. The only 4 exceptions would be houses Corbray, Grafton, the Royce of the Gates of the Moon and Baelish. It had been agreed that House Corbray would have to hand over a quarter of their lands to House Belmore. House Grafton would also have to hand over 15% of their lands to House Royce and suffer an extra tax on their shipping for the next 50 years. The cadet branch of his own house had also been discussed. His cousin Nestor would be sent to the wall, together with his son Ander, thereby extinguishing the branch in the male line. All lands and titles belonging to the branch would revert to House Arryn, while all their valuables and coin would return to the main line of House Royce. Miranda Royce, Nestor's daughter, would be married off to one of his own vassals on the condition he would provide a good dowry for her. Lastly, House Baelish had been named. With the future execution of Lord Petter, the house would go extinct. All lands and valuables belonging to them in the Vale would revert to House Arryn. This included debts owed by merchants or noble houses. All debts belonging to nobles of the loyal houses, their vassals or allied merchant families would be written off immediately. All properties inside of their territories would be handed over to the loyal lords or vassals in question. The remainder would be handed over to House Arryn. By doing this they hoped to replenish some of House Arryn's strength after the losses they took during the war. The money would go to rebuilding the areas surrounding the Bloody Gate and the Eyrie, both partly ravaged by war. They also wanted to reward some of their own vassals, and it was known that Baelish owned many inns, taverns and whorehouses across the Vale. The lords present had also felt secure enough to finally start discussing other rewards than lands. He had managed to get the big price he had always wanted. His daughter Lucilla would marry young Lord Harold. The dowry would nominally be the lands and titles belonging to his cousin Nestor. The Vale would forever be ruled by his descendants hereafter. In addition, he had managed to gain the third son of Lord Upcliff as a ward. This would allow him to further influence Wychell in the future. House Waynwood got their claimant on the throne. Apart from that and the gifts that would surely come of it down the line, they had received other rewards. Sir Donal Waynwood would be confirmed as Knight of the Bloody Gate. Lord Harold was also to take Anya's youngest grandson Wyl Waynwood as a squire. The young heir of late Sir Vardis Egan would be a page and later a squire to Sir Morton Waynwood. The Redforts also get their rewards. Sir John Redfort would be offered the position of Captain of the Guards at the Eyrie, while his cousin Sir Adrian was to get command of one of the way castles on the staircase to the Eyrie. He would also get the heir to House Waxel as his ward, ensuring his influence over his southern neighbours. The Templetons would be raised to lordly status, instead of that of landed knights. They had long had the power for it, now they also received the title. Additionally, Sir Simon's bastard brother, who had distinguished himself in the campaign, would be knighted and receive some small lands close to House Arryn. He would from then on be directly sworn to the Eyrie. Many small landed knights had died in the service of Lady Lysa and her bastards, so it shouldn't be difficult to find some land that came available. House Hunter had been the most difficult to please. They were the only ones that didn't directly border any of the treacherous houses. As such, they were the only ones that didn't gain lands. In addition, Lord Jalwood didn't have any children yet to promise or squire, and he had a bad relation to his brother. As such, rewarding him wasn't a good course of action either. In the end it had been decided that Lord Jalwood's firstborn daughter would marry Lord Harold's future heir. He also received the young grandson of Lord Elisham as a squire and the promise of prestigious titles for any second or third son he may have in the future. Some of the rewards had also been set aside for House Belmore. They would get the guardianship of the future heir to House Prior, a 5-year-old girl. Lord Benedar's youngest son will also be allowed to squire for Lord Harold when he comes of age. A matrilineal marriage between the two, to get the lordship, would be possible in the future, if none of the two remaining Lopes brothers were to get any sons. On top of that, much coin would be distributed among themselves and their vassals. House Hunter would be given a little more than the others, as to balance out their lack of immediate rewards. Lastly, the Vale would be strengthened through the policy of intermarriage between loyal houses. Lord Jalwood Hunter agreed to start negotiations with Lord Belmore about the hand of his unwed daughter. Sir Jasper Redfort, Lord Horton's heir, agreed to marry Jessamine Templeton, Lord Simon's younger sister. Lord Simond himself would marry Lady Anya's youngest daughter Marcella. His own youngest, 12 years old Rhea Royce, was to be engaged to Sir Roland Waynwood. On top of that, they were encouraged to talk amongst each other, and together with Lord Benedar Belmore, about fosterings, squires and future betrothals. It had been decided that the core of the Vale nobility for the next 2 generations would be made up by the lords in that tent. A thing all of them gleefully agreed to. The war in the Vale was soon to be over, yet they would have to join another war immediately after that. News from the Riverlands told them that Ned's boy was in trouble, although the news of the recent Ironborn attacks may change that. Still, they would need to help him soon so they could finally deal with the incest Lannister bastards sitting on the Iron Throne. Tyrion Lannister, Joffrey Waters and most of his false Kingsguard had already died. Yet, he would still have Cersei's head and that of all of the bannermen that had caused Robar's death. He would take each and every one of them down. He would show them that we Royces, we remember. Chapter 44, The Twins. 300 AC. Asterisk disclaimer, this chapter contains clear references to rape and other kinds of sexual assault. Robert Glover. He sat on a wooden log in his camp, as he overlooked the twins. They had been here for 9 days and his troops were getting bored. Understandably so, as they sat here all day doing nothing. They had marched from Moat Cailin 17 days ago. It had taken them 7 days to cross the neck, due to late autumn snows. Luckily, they had had help from House Reed. Jarmos Reed, Lord Howland's cousin, had been ordered to help them pass when the time came. He had helped them pick out spots to set up camp at night. He had also provided intel and fresh lizard meat. It definitely wasn't his favorite, but it was a welcome change from salted beef or stale bread. They had immediately left after he had received word from the king to move south. The letter had existed of 3 important pieces of information. Firstly, his brother had been killed and he was now Lord Glover. Secondly, he had been killed by the Freys, who had betrayed them all. Thirdly, he had to move south and kill Freys before joining the main army. When he had received the letter, he had raged and screamed. He had cursed every living Free on the planet and the gods knew they were many. Luckily for him, the army had been ready for months. As such, they had been able to leave the next morning and now they were sitting here. Although it didn't seem like it, things were finally happening. This morning, the last of the Riverlander forces had finally arrived on the western bank. Some 600 men, he guessed, from houses Blackwood, Mallister and Peage had assembled there. He had already sent word that he wished to speak to them an hour before dusk. The Peages had been so kind as to bring some of their barges up the river, which made communication between the 2 forces much easier. He had already planned the attack and would explain the idea to the Riverlords tonight. With some luck, he might feast on that weasel traitor's wine tomorrow evening. For now, he had to wait, just like he had done the past few days. Yet, he didn't let his army slack off. Young Lord Cleesewin was drilling a regiment of men at the moment, while Sir Roderick Castle was making the rounds of the camp. Those commanders were an interesting duo. The first one was a young highborn noble, who had just come into his lordship after the death of his father. He was energetic, optimistic and talented, although inexperienced. The second was an old and chiseled knight. He had been born into a lower masterly house and had served House Stark loyally for over 4 decades. He didn't think it possible to find a more veteran commander than that one. The Castle Knight had served in every war of the last half a century. Still, the 2 of them shared a bond of some sort. Lord Clee's older sister had married Sir Roderick's nephew and because of that they had seen much of each other these past few years. Even after Jory Castle died, the families had continued their great relations. It was clear from the way they spoke that both doted on Jonelle Castle and her 3 small children. The children were of interesting stock too. Although they technically belonged to a small masterly house, their mother had belonged to the lordly House Sewin. Even more impressive was the fact that both Lady Castle and her children were practically inseparable from House Stark. Young Prince Rukan and Princess Edara seemed glued together with those kids. He had long made a mental note about House Castle. The next generation of the house would rise far above their station, he was sure of it. The children were of an age with his own son and daughter, maybe he could offer to foster one in the future. If his feeling was right, it would earn him favor of not only House Sewin, but House Stark and some of the North's rising stars as well. Lastly there was Toghan Flint, 3rd son of Lord Flint of Flint's Finger. The 20-year-old man was loud and more than a little wild, but solid as a rock. Now he was briefing their scouts on what they had seen. He wasn't taking any risks and had sent out many. They were still in enemy territory and had to behave as such. Whatever the case may be, he could be in worse company. They were good men. All of them had lost family to the Lannisters and were determined to get their revenge. That revenge had personified itself into the wrinkled old face of Walder Frey, or at least it had for him. He picked up his whetstone and started sharpening his sword, while thinking about his brother and how it had come to pass that he was suddenly named head of their house. Since his brother hadn't had any children yet, he had considered the fact that his son might inherit Deepwood Motte one day. Before the battle, it had also seemed as his brother Galbart had been playfully raising Goran to that end. Yet, he had never considered getting the title for himself. He had quickly realized the amount of responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders had been great. His house was down to only him and his son and daughter with the death of his brother. His father and cousin Ethan had died in the rebellion and his sister had died in the birthing bed. Now the three of them were all that was left. The only real alliances they had was with the Locks through his wife and the Hornwoods through the fostering of Lay and Snow. Not a horrible position to be in, but not a great one either. Their lands had also suffered massively from the Ironborn. Thankfully, their keep hadn't fallen, but it would have still taken some damage. He imagined many of the villages around it, as well as parts of the Wolf's Wood, had been destroyed. It would time to rebuild those. Hopefully, most of the small folk had managed to survive. Many of his men had family there and he wouldn't wish it on anyone to lose their family. More pragmatically, rebuilding a small folk population was a task that could take many years and cost them a lot. House Glover couldn't afford that. Suddenly, his thoughts were disrupted with shouts coming from the east side of the camp. He immediately stood up and clasped his sword in his right hand as he strode over to the source of the commotion. As he arrived at the border of their camp, he could see a few dozen were running around, while Toggen Flint was shouting orders. He walked over to his commander and shouted, "Flint, in the name of the gods, what is going on here?" The man looked over to him. "My scouts have seen an enemy force 300 strong marching on us through the woods. They will be upon us soon." His ominous reply came. He immediately jumped into action. Soldiers armor up. Spear and swordsman to the front, archers in behind. The enemy is upon us. He called, as he himself walked forward onto the plain next to the camp. "You there? Run as fast as you can to my command tent and get Benjicott Woods to saddle up the cavalry and right it here immediately. Shout at everyone you pass to pick their weapons and assemble here." He called towards some soldier, who immediately ran off. "You, run to the hornblowers and get them to signal that we're being attacked." He shouted at another. On the plain, their men started arriving piecemeal and he did his best to organize them in a makeshift spear wall, while Toggen organized the archers behind. A few minutes later, they heard the horns blow the signal and he sighed a sound of relief. That feeling was cut short however, as less than a minute later the sounds were answered by hostile trumpets. Out of the woods in front of them dozens of men started charging. Those dozens soon became hundreds. He looked around him, some 200 men had formed up around them in all kinds of stages of ready. Some only wore boiled leather with a sword, others had their chainmail and shields with them. It didn't matter, they would have to hold. "Archers, knock!" he shouted, as the enemy came closer. "Loose, now!" He finished a few seconds later and some 3 dozen arrows flew in the air. He saw a few men fall, but they were mere drops in a sea of enemies. "Archer, fire at will!" He took place in the line, after one of his men gave him his shield. "We kill these sons of bitches now, men. Tonight, we feast in their halls upon their own wine and women." A roar of approval came, as he lifted his sword and looked around. Still, men were running from the camp to reinforce them. They outnumbered them greatly, they just had to hold until their whole army arrived. "We charge!" he roared and he started running towards the enemy. He saw 2 enemy soldiers go down to his archers, as he ran and then he was upon them. He immediately ducked under the swing of an axe coming towards his head. Without looking back, he swung his sword to the side. The roar of pain told him he had his target and hamstrung his opponent. He charged on, deflecting a spear with his shield and a mace with his sword in the progress. He was suddenly stopped, as a man at arms hit his shield against his. The blow pushed him back a couple of steps, but he still remained on his feet. He sidestepped the blow of another footman, as he blocked a sword swing of the enemy with the shield. 2 opponents, it had been a while since he had fought 2 enemies at the same time. He ducked under another swing and used it step inside the man at arms guard. He hit the pommel of his sword in his face and heard his nose break. On instinct, he turned around and caught the mace of the footman on his shield. He counterattacked and stuck his sword in the man's belly. Before he could pull it out, he heard a roar behind him. He turned around again, just in time. The sword came down with incredible force and his shield only just managed to catch the blow. Even then, the power behind it made him lose his footing. He fell on the ground hard but had no time to contemplate the pain in his back. He deflected another overhead swing with his shield from upon the ground. Another came, this time he rolled away from it. Leaving his shield in the dirt, he pulled out his dagger and charged the footman. The man, surprised by his sudden charge, reacted too late and he tackled him to the ground. He managed to get on top of him and hit the man in the face twice, before deciding he was stunned enough to use his dagger. He turned the point towards his enemy and pushed it deep inside his neck. He pulled it out and quickly got up, the gurgling sound of the man choking on his own blood in the background. He picked his sword out of the first one's belly, using it immediately to deflect an enemy blow to his head. He glanced around and realized he had charged in too deep. He was surrounded by enemy soldiers and the few men that managed to follow him were being cut down. He slowly fought his way back to the line, knocking an enemy spearman into the dirt on his way there. Suddenly, he saw 2 flint men struggling against 5 enemies. He knocked away the sword of the Hague swordsman he was currently fighting, and ran towards them. He managed to run his sword through one of them, before the others realized he was there. He let the lifeless body fall to the ground, as he started fighting 2 of them at once with his dagger and sword at the same time. He managed to hold them off but couldn't find the time to deal a blow himself. He kicked one back and sidestepped the other's swing and threw his dagger in the leg of one of the enemies still assailing the flint men. "Get your friend out of here!" he shouted towards the one who didn't seem wounded. The flint man obeyed and pulled the other under his arm as he deflected a blow towards them. He himself deflected 3 more swings meant to kill him, before walking back and shielding the flint men's retreat. He didn't know how many he was fighting at once, as he just kept deflecting swords, spears and axes on instinct. 2 managed to get past his guard. One caught his left arm and the pain there indicated nothing good, the other one just glanced of his chainmail at his shoulder. He was getting tired and feared he couldn't hold on much longer, but suddenly he was surrounded by men wearing his house's colors. "My lord, we had feared you lost," a man shouted, as he pulled him towards him. To his surprise he recognized him as Cregan Bowl, one of his vassals and lifelong companions. His vassal deflected a blow aimed towards him and shouted for some foot soldiers to take their place in the line, as he pulled him out of the fighting. "Robert, you are wounded," Cregan gasped in surprise. He looked over to his left arm and remembered the blow that had went past his guard. "I'll be fine," he grunted. "No, you need help. Come with me, now," his friend insisted. "No, we need to win this fight first," he replied. However, just then Benjicot Woods rode out of the camps with dozens of riders. They smashed into the right side of the enemy and suddenly the battle changed. "Onwards men, fucking kill them," he heard Sir Roderick Castle scream from somewhere. Slowly, but surely, he saw they started pushing the enemy back as fresh soldiers from inside the camp kept reinforcing their line. The battle would soon be over, he recognized. He had nothing to contribute here anymore, so he went willingly back to the camp with his friend. The son of Lord Bowl put him down in front of a tent and started helping him with pulling off his leather and chainmail armor. After all the leather straps were undone, he helped pull the chainmail over his head and the effort greatly stung in his arm. His friend picked up a wine sack from around the campfire and handed it to him against the pain. He drank deeply, as he gritted his teeth against the pain. Cregan cut off the sleeve of his undergarments and looked upon the wound. "It looks worse than it is, my lord," he finally said, after inspecting the wound for a while. He looked over towards it and saw fresh blood was still flowing out. The blood looked clean, which was at least a good sign. Without any hesitation, the man cut off a piece of what looked like some soldier's blanket and started binding it over the wound. After a while, he seemed satisfied and got up. "The wound looks clean and this will stop the bleeding. It will leave a scar, but otherwise you'll be fine," his friend said. "You lost some blood though, maybe some rest will do you good." "I can rest after this mess is dealt with," he grunted, as he got up. Without a word, he started to walk back towards the plain where the fighting had taken place. As he moved across it, Lord Sawin stopped him. "Where are you coming from, Robert?" Got scared and ran away from the battle. The young noble laughed, although it was clear he was joking. "That madman running away from the fight, you dumb Sawin." He heard Toggen Flint shout, before he could answer. The noble walked over towards them, as he kept shouting. "That crazy suicidal maniac over here charged through the enemy lines at the start of the battle. While most of us were immediately stopped in our tracks, that fucker just kept going. It was as if the sea of enemies split open to let him through and swallow him up afterwards. Everyone thought him lost, until he suddenly popped up out of nowhere, helping 2 of my men to safety." "What happened and how the fuck did you manage that, Glover?" He finally finished, clear astonishment in his eyes and voice. "I don't know." He just shrugged. "We had to stall them until the rest of the army could join us, so I just charged. I fought off more than a few enemy soldiers there, before I realized I had charged in too deep. As I tried to manage a fighting retreat, I stumbled upon those men of yours and tried taking them back with me. It got me this though," he explained, as he gestured towards the blooded cloth bound around his arm. Both nobles looked upon his wound. "Is it any bad?" young Lord Sawin asked. "Nay, the wound is clean. It hurts like a bitch, though," he answered. Toggen laughed aloud at that. "All the more reason to drink tonight, good man," he said as he clasped his good shoulder. "Not tonight, Flint. I have a meeting with the river lords across the river tonight. You are free to join me for it," he replied to his commander. "Really? You are no fun, are you, Glover? You are already the main commander of the force and the king isn't here to impress. You just won a battle, live and celebrate a little." Toggen scoffed. "I will celebrate only when I have the blood of Walder Free running through my fingers, Flint. I will drink you all senseless after we take the twins' wine cellar and I have a cup, made out of its traitorous lord's scalp, in my hand. Not before that, do you understand?" he replied grimly. "Aye," both young nobles replied. "Good, now I expect you to join me tonight, Flint. Earn yourselves the wine we'll be drinking soon," he said as he walked away to find Sir Roderick for a full analysis of the fight. 2 days later. They had to postpone his plans for a day because of the attack from Houses Hague and Irenford. Now they were all ready. His army had been secretly assembled in the dark, as they were waiting for the force on the other bank to make their move. They had ladders, grappling hooks and even a battering ram at the ready, but for now they were crouched in the dark behind the border of their camp. After a while, a lot of torches could be seen across the river, as the river lords started their attack. Still, they remained silent. They wanted to pull away most of the free garrison to the western castle, after which they would storm and take the eastern one. Soon, the sounds of fighting could be heard on the western bank. He knew the river lords could not sustain the attack, yet he had to wait a little longer to give the frays from the eastern castle the ability to reinforce their western counterparts. After some 10 to 15 minutes had passed, he got up and shouted for his men to attack. In the blink of an eye, dozens of torches were lit all around him as the battering ram started moving. They crossed the distance between the camp and the castle with speed. Once they were close to the walls, dozens of men quickly pulled large wooden panels and planks over the moat, as planned. After judging at least part of the makeshift bridges stable, the siege ladders moved up. Soon all 6 of them were put to the walls, as dozens of grappling hooks were swung over the walls. He could only see a few archers and men at arms on the walls, but they certainly wouldn't be able to stop the 1,800 men charging at them. Due to his wound, climbing the ladders wasn't an option. As such, he stayed with the siege ram. Toggen and Lord Sawin would storm the walls in his place. All the while, Sir Roderick stayed back with 400 heavy infantrymen. The moment the gates were opened, these fresh men would storm through and charge right towards the keep to block reinforcements from the other castle getting here. The path towards the bridge ran through the keep, so that was their first priority. Some minutes passed and the fighting on the walls was coming closer and closer towards the gatehouse, as more of his men climbed the ropes and ladders every second. In the meantime, they kept pounding on the gates, but it wouldn't budge. The longer they did so, the higher their casualties were mounting. He imagined more and more free soldiers were reinforcing the gatehouse, as could be seen by the increased number of projectiles coming through the murder holes. He waited and waited, but the gate was very slowly started deteriorating. Suddenly, he saw the free flags on the gatehouse being torn down and fighting was heard behind the gate. He signaled for Sir Roderick and his detachment to move closer, and true enough, the gate was opened moments late. The heavy infantry charged as ordered, simply pushing many of the remaining Freys to the ground for him and his men behind to finish off afterwards. He saw how a few dozen men from the walls had been holding off a larger group of Freys in the courtyard, long enough to open the gates. Now, Sir Roderick was just charging through both groups right towards the keep, and the courtyard turned into a chaotic melee. He led his men forward against the scattered Freys, trying as best to occupy them so Sir Roderick's group could advance. He cut off a Free Knight's sword hand, as he stabbed a footman in the leg from behind. He had to hold back in this battle, as his wound bothered him and didn't allow him to wield a shield. They had more than enough men to make up for that though, and he concentrated on leading them. He ordered his men to spread out and overwhelm the enemies left in the courtyard. The disciplined and loyal Northmen immediately followed his orders and got to work. After parrying another spearman that had run at him, and pushing him in the hands of 3 of his men at arms, he looked around once more. It looked like Sir Roderick had managed to force his way into the keep, while Flint and Sewin had secured the walls. He shouted towards Toggen, who had come down from the walls, to take care of the handful of Freys remaining. Gathering dozens of men around him, he charged inside the keep. Sir Roderick would have to hold the bridge, while he would clear out the castle. He ran past the bodies of the Freys, who had tried to hold here, and told his soldiers to spread out. They had received orders to kill every male Free on sight, all but one. Lord Walder was his. All women and children were to be brought to the Great Hall. He ran towards the Great Hall to secure it and quickly disposed himself of the 2 men he met in the halls. He knocked open the doors, and what he found didn't disappoint. There sat Lord Walder, surrounded by dozens of his breed. Most of those were women and children, but some fighting men remained. One approached him and his men. He held a sword in hand, although it didn't look like he knew how to use it. "I am Sir Edwin Free, heir to the twins. We hereby surrender in your custody, Lord Glover. We hope you will threat us." He started to say, he just laughed in response. He remembered this prick from all the months he had stayed here. Killing him would be a pleasure. He stepped forward and viciously slashed his sword across the man's neck. While Sir Edwin, or whatever his name was, choked to death on the floor beside him, he turned towards the other Freys. "You killed my brother by stabbing him in the back and almost lost us this war. Surrender will not help you now." It felt good to stab Black Walder's brother. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, like the saying went. He turned towards his soldiers. "Get rid of the men, take the women and children into custody." Dozens of his soldiers started moving forward as he walked towards Lord Walder, sitting in his massive black oaken chair. The old weasel looked down at him in horror, as he simply swatted away a young Free that tried to stop him from reaching the Lord of the Crossing. He had first thought of letting the young boy, who couldn't be older than 15 years of age, lay there, but thought better of it. He picked the boy up at his neck, as he dragged him in front of Lord Free. "See, the end you brought to House Free, old Walder." He spit at him as he cut the boy's throat. "Ah, Robert, how? Why? You monster!" The once so proud Lord Walder proclaimed. His inevitable end seemed to finally tone down the old man. "That boy wasn't the first and won't be the last Free to die today. Your line of upstart toll collectors is at an end, Walder. The only good thing making so many sons did you, is that you will get to see them all die in front you, old man. Look around you, tell me what you see." He called back. Both glanced around and could see how multiple Freys were being killed around them. Others had already turned into nothing more than opened bodies on the floor. All men and older boys were cut down, while his men were hoarding the women together. A few looking greedily upon some of the prettier ones. This is all people will ever remember of House Free. A pile of bodies inside 2 castles next to a bridge. That's all people will speak of in 100 years. He grinned. They might even speak of me, who did it. The Lord, who was never supposed to be one in the first place. The Glover Lord avenging his betrayed brother. I hope they'll sing of how I enjoyed this. He laughed as he walked up to the old Free Lord. Having spotted the dagger, Lord Walder held his hand behind his back. From miles away, he quickly twisted the man's arm to make it fall to the floor. After that, he dragged the old man from his seat by his hair and threw him upon the ground in the middle of the hall. "You can't do this. I am a lord. I have rights." The scared weasel screamed out. "Oh, you haven't heard. King Rob has stripped you and all Freys from all of your lands and titles. All your holdings and belongings are to be confiscated. You are nothing more than a treasonous old beggar. You are no lord and have no rights. No one will come to save you, and if they do, they meet the same fate as your family will." He laughed and some of his men joined in. Now they had finished their killing. Many of his sworn houses had lost kin with his brother in Atlanta. It was not only about his revenge. It was the whole of the army that thirsted for it. They all wanted it. He looked around the women and children gathered. He remembered the king's letter had mentioned to not harm any of the children or women who had originally come from loyal houses from the Riverlands or the Vale. He had also specifically mentioned a Roslyn Free and that she wasn't to be harmed. He wasn't the one to question his king's commands, so he would do as ordered. Besides, there were more than enough Freys left for all of their revenge after he got all of those out. The women kept screaming him to spare them and their children. He had ignored it before, but now he turned to them. He called out, "None of the small children will be harmed. You have my word." In response, an older woman spit at him. "Your word? You just slit the throat of a 14-year-old boy and we have to believe your word." He walked over to her. "Even after splitting the throats of 100 14-year-old boys, my word will still be worth a dozen times more than that of a Free. I remember your men arriving too late at the Trident. I heard how your old lord here refused to rally to Riverrun at his liege lord's command at the start of this war. I was here when he demanded conditions for joining our army, even if it was being led by the grandson of his liege with the objective of freeing Riverrun. I was there when Sir Stephen and his son swore their oaths to King Rob. My brother was killed because the Freys broke their word and stabbed the king's army in the back. Don't you ever dare to lecture me on my word, Free. That goes for any of you," he shouted as he looked over the scared faces of the Free women. The one who had spoken had the decency to look ashamed and somewhat scared, so he left it at that. "As I was saying, none of the children will be harmed. Now, is there a Roslyn Free in the room?" he asked aloud, as some of his soldiers were coming in with more women and children in tow. "Here she is," a woman in her mid-20s said in a vile tone as she pushed a shy and comely maid forward. The woman who had pushed her had the unmistakable weasel expression of a Free and he disliked her already. This family really was disgusting. She gave up her kinswoman, for no reason at all. He signaled to two of Glover men standing to the side. "You two, you make sure she remains unharmed. Anyone put a hand on her, they lose it. Orders from the king himself." The two soldiers nodded dutifully, as they led Lady Roslyn to a corner of the hall. "Now keep everyone here unharmed until I return. I have a few more Freys to kill," he called out and his men laughed in reply. All in all, it took less than half an hour to finish off the last 100 or so Freys that were left when he returned. They managed to hold the bridge for a while, but when the Riverlanders managed to take control of the western castle it was over. Around 50 had surrendered, all of those belonging to houses Free. Haig or Renford would be executed tomorrow. The others would be sent to the wall. The Riverlanders had already started raiding the western castle under Lord Bryndon Blackwood, who had lost his father at Atlanta because of the Freys. He led them to it, as he knew the Free family lived in the eastern castle. He tried his best to ignore the screams of the women coming out of the castle, as he walked back over the bridge. Most of those would have been innocent serving women, but that was war. When he got back in the Great Hall, he saw the group of women and children had more than doubled since his arrival. "Has the whole castle been searched?" he asked Benjicott Woods, one of his vassals. "Aye, my lord. Some were even found hiding in the stables beneath piles of hay." He nodded in response, before slowly walking over the dark oak wooden chair of the Lord of the Crossing, and he sat himself down to the shock of most of the Freys in attendance. "Now, my king ordered me to keep all of the children and the wives, who once belonged to loyal houses, safe. So, anyone here, who was born into one of those houses, step forward. I will not ask again," he ordered. Many women stepped forward, too many. He immediately recognized some of the liars. He pointed them out, while others helped. Most of his men had stayed at the Twins with him before taking Moat Cailin, so most of his commanders knew a lot of the noble members of the family. After a while they had split the women into two groups. The children were brought with the wives to one side. "What will happen to us?" a free girl asked, who he recognized as Gatehouse Amy. This was in turn supported by the beautiful girl next him, Fair Wilder as he remembered, and many others. "You know," he started speaking, as he stood up. "The great boon of lingering around this dreadful castle for months is the fact that I heard many rumors about your family. I heard all about you, Gatehouse Amy, or you Fair Wilder. Some of the rumors you share together, not exclusively. No, others have done it too," he said as he walked down into the great hall. "The rumors I heard about you were that the both of you have slept with your cousin Black Walder on more than one occasion, isn't that right?" he said slowly, but loud enough for the whole of the room to hear. The booming laughter and crude remarks that rose up from the room proved that they had indeed all heard it. The girls' color on their cheeks changed to a flaming red, as the room amused themselves with their fate. "Your reaction tells me those rumors were true," he chuckled. "Can I tell you another secret? This one you may not know." He looked at the girls, both either too ashamed or afraid to respond this time. "My brother was stabbed to death by Black Walder Free," he explained, as his tone turned grim. At this revelation, more than a few women's faces fell. "Now the fact that none of you were shy about opening your legs to your murderous cousin, tells me you won't mind doing the same for my men, right? I think they deserve it, as a reward, after a long day of fighting." Now, the whole room turned grim. Almost all men were making lecherous comments, as the boldest among them tried to grab a hold of one of the women already. You can't do this. We're noble women," Fair Wilder shouted. "Oh, we can and we will. Look around you, my lady," he responded, mockingly emphasizing the noble title. "All of these men lost friends or kin at Atlanta, all of them want revenge. I will not deny it to them, nor will I deny them some fun with the daughters and sisters of the men that slew their brothers and fathers. You can't do this. Please spare me. I will tell you who orchestrated it, I will tell you everything. I'm innocent, please." A woman, sporting the free features, begged, as she went to her knees. "Innocent, huh? Let me tell you another story. I received word from a vassal of mine. After the battle, they found letters. Some stupid free, forgotten to history, thought it was a good idea to write about was going to happen with his wife and daughter. Of course, those letters weren't sent by Raven, so you could speak openly, right? A lot of damning evidence was in there. About who thought what and who all knew. A lot of names were in those letters apparently. Half of you knew what was going to happen and none of you said a damn word. You are all traitors to your liege lord and to your king in my eyes and you will be treated as such, am I clear?" he responded. He saw most of the women cower away, as others started to cry or scream. He ignored them all, as he looked over to Lord Walder. He walked over to him and dragged the old weasel back up to his high seat. Afterwards, he pushed a piece of cloth into his mouth, to make him shut up. He bound his hands and feet to the chair, before turning around to the hall. "The lord of the castle is sitting in his seat, so I think the feast can begin now. Wine from Lord Walder's cellar is already being brought up for all of you and more will be brought into the courtyard later. Enjoy yourselves, you have all earned it. I only ask one thing of you. If any of you want to take one of these lovely ladies with you to show them a good time, don't do it in one of the halls. I heard many feather beds have recently become available in this castle, so I would urge you to make the most of it," he proclaimed, and he was met with a roar of approval. Almost immediately, some of the men jumped into action. While most looked extremely pleased, some like young Lord Sewin looked at him in disgust. He was young, he would get used to the realities of war soon enough. Sir Roderick just looked stoically in front of him, as he left the hall alone. Most of the other nobles did partake in his offerings. Toggen threw Fair Wilder over his shoulder, while he held a goblet of wine in his other hand and walked out of the hall towards the free sleeping quarters. Cregan Bowl managed to procure himself Gatehouse Amy, while Benjicott Woods carried brown-haired Alex Free off in his arms. He wasn't surprised that his captains had taken some of the better-looking frays for themselves. After getting a cup of wine, he walked over towards the bound form of Lord Walder and whispered in his ear. "Behold the glory that awaits House Free, my lord." It was midday and a beautiful cool autumn sun shone on the twin castles. All of his important men had gathered around him, while hundreds of soldiers wanted to see it too. The whole of the courtyard and all of the walls were lined up with armed men who wanted to see the death of Lord Walder and the last of his adult sons and grandsons. If it had been his to decide, he would have killed all males in the castle from the youngest baby to old Walder. However, it wasn't his. His king had made it clear that no child was to be harmed, and so it would be. The 9 traitors were lined up for him to see. 6 of them were Freys, 2 were Irenfords and 1 was a Hague. They would all die today. He would personally make sure of that. The Riverlords had looked at him with big eyes an hour ago when he had told them he would swing the axe himself. These Andals didn't know their ways, of course. The only one that seemed to understand somewhat was the new Lord Blackwood, Bryndon he was called. In the eldest son of Lord Tytos, like in all Blackwoods, the blood of the first men still flowed. He swung the axe around a few times in his hands to get used to the weapon, before the first traitor was brought up. "What's your name?" he asked. "Stefan Free," the man replied. He nodded. "Stefan Free, you are hereby convicted of high treason against the king by betraying his army and colluding with the enemy. I, Robert Glover the Lord of Deepwood Motte, sentence you to death in the name of his grace, King Robb Stark. Do you have any last words?" I had nothing to do with this, I swear, I swear. Please spare me, please. I beg you to let me go," the man cried. He looked upon him with disdain. These Freys were even shit at dying, it seemed. So be it. He nodded to the guard standing next to the Free and he pushed his head down on the block. "Please, no. No. Please let me go, let me go," the man cried out, as he tried to struggle away, but it had no use. The guard pinned him in his back, so he couldn't leave the tree trunk that made its use as an executioner block today. He took a deep breath and raised the axe in the sky. He quickly glanced over to old Lord Walder, before breathing out while he swung the axe with all his might. The pain in his arm flared, but it had been enough. He saw how the crying man's head was rolling in the dirt across the yard and let out a sigh. Next, he called stoically. So, it went on for a while, until only Lord Walder was left. Some had screamed, some had cried, while others had stayed silent. The only memorable death had been from the lame Free, Lothar he thought he was called. He had cursed his family and laughed with his brother's death, saying he would be glad to kill him again in the afterlife. At least one Free who knew how to die, he supposed. It had made the swing of his axe all the more satisfying. At last, Lord Walder was brought up. He looked like he could die of a heart attack any second, but he wouldn't let that happen. This morning, more evidence had been found against the old Lord of the Twins. His correspondence with the Lannisters had just been laying around his solar. He couldn't resist saying something, when he looked at the bitter old man. "Don't worry, Free. Where you will be going you won't be alone. Half your family will be waiting there for you." Those old eyes just looked up at him, devoid of any emotion. It seemed like the feast from the day before had finally broken the old man. Good, that was what he deserved. "Walder Free, you are hereby convicted of high treason against the king by betraying his army and colluding with the enemy. You are also convicted of the treasonous murder of dozens of nobles from both the north and the Riverlands. I, Robert Glover the Lord of Deepwood Motte, sentence you to death in the name of his grace, King Robb Stark. Do you, as the last Lord of the Twins, have any last words?" The old man lifted his head a little, as it was mentioned he would be the last lord of his house, but said nothing. "Very well," he said and lifted his axe. He closed his eyes a little and when he opened them again, he inhaled and whispered. "This one's for you, brother." Then the axe came down. Moments later, Lord Walder Free was no more. Chapter 45, The Battle of the God's Eye. 300 AC. Robb. He was sitting in the Tully Solar alone, leaning backwards against the oaken chair that had belonged to his late grandfather. As he looked outside of the window, he could see it was a sunny autumn day. It was rather cold for the Riverlands, but he preferred it that way. It made him feel more at home. The last weeks had been difficult for him. On one hand, he had been stuck here, not being able to do anything. On the other hand, he had needed to prepare for everything that may or may not happen with them stuck here. Trenches had been dug, troops had been trained and battle plans had been made for an enemy that had never come. All that had come were the messages of more of his vassals' keeps falling, often viciously sacked and burned afterwards. Although he understood them, it had still been tiring to have to keep the riverlords in check day by day. He was beginning to understand what an ungrateful job it was to rule these divided lands. What a strain it must have taken on his grandfather. Yet, he had managed to do so for now. He was still here, all of his lords were too. Many of them had threatened to leave the army and go back to their homes, but none ever did. Even if no one got out, that didn't mean nothing got in. He looked once again upon the thick stack of letters he had received in the past weeks. Sometimes it felt as if the time stood still here in Riverrun, but then he remembered those letters and it seemed as if time had accelerated tenfold. So much had happened, so much had changed. Most notable had been the news of the twins. The Freys had fallen and Lord Walder and his heirs were dead. The male line of Sir Stephen dying out, as many other free lines had. The new heir of the twins was of little consequence. Imman Free and his brood were Lannisters in all but name, none of them would ever rule anything in the Riverlands. The stories he had heard about the twins had given him nightmares. The people were already calling it the rape of the twins. If the stories were true, it wasn't far from the truth. The tale was quickly becoming his customary and he didn't like it one bit. Be that as it may, Lord Robert hadn't actually disobeyed any direct order of his. All those he had wanted spared were alive and hadn't been touched, yet he hadn't thought the fate of the others would have been quite so gruesome. It wasn't only the Freys either. The Irenfords and Haigs had tried to ambush Glover's force. So after they took the twins, forces had been dispatched to do the same to those smaller houses. Their keeps had been almost undefended, after almost all of their men had been lost during the failed ambush. The repetition of the horror on a smaller scale with those two houses only served to greaten the effect the story had. He had always known there would be revenge. He had even welcomed the party of riders, who had come 2 days ago. They had brought with them the heads of Lord Walder and his 2 great-grandsons and heirs Sir Edwin and Sir Petter. This had greatly lifted morale among his soldiers. He had had the heads set on a pike above the gatehouse as a message for everyone to see. Those stories still haunted him, but most of his men didn't have that issue. Even his friends didn't care. Harry and To had been glad in a way apparently. They said their father would never have died if they could have followed their original battle plan without the betrayals of the Freys. Smalljan's only comment had been that they would have to make sure no bastards were born of it, as he did not want House Free to have any more members. To them this felt like honest revenge and others seemed to agree with this. Sir Willis Mandaily had even pointed out how it could politically work in his favour. No one would dare to betray him now, while enemy houses would be more willing to surrender in the future if they knew this could await them when they resisted. He had also mentioned that, although what happened at the twins would be connected to his reign, he couldn't be personally blamed or praised for it. That dubious honour would go to Lord Robert. To punish the loyal lord, who had followed his every order and brought his army there, revenge would drive his army to mutiny. So, there was nothing he could do, except to try and live with it. All he could do was make sure it never happened. That said, he would still have to punish House Free and get rid of most of those family members. Too many possible claimants that needed to be dealt with were still running around. If he didn't want the next 5 generations of his house to be faced with constant rebellions and uprisings in that region, he had to take care of them. There had also been some very good news. Lord Royce had managed to follow up his victory and capture Gulltown. The enemy army was broken, and by now the pieces had all but surrendered. Multiple new houses had joined their cause and the reinforced army would soon march on the few remaining enemies in the Vale. Lord Royce had reassured him again that his cousin Robert Stone would be sent to the wall and would not be executed. Aunt Lysa would most likely be forced to join the Silent Sisters. She had brought that on herself sadly. More good news had arrived yesterday. Lord Tarley had finally been seen marching in southwest direction with 30,000 reachmen. This left Tywine alone and vulnerable. The army was already preparing. They would leave in 2 days. If everything went well, he would again have just over 20,000 men. If you added to them the 2,000 or so reinforcements with which Lord Glover would be marching, they again had an impressive force. He would for once outnumber the Lannisters, a peculiar feeling which he had decided he quite liked. Tarlis' departure was of course the result of many other things happening in Westeros. The Iron Man had attacked the Arbor and had taken many of the small islands around it. They used it as bases to attack keeps, villages and shipment on either sound of the Whispering Sound. The Arbor proper had had the worst of it. Euron Greyjoy's force had sacked Ryamsport and taken Vinetown and Starfish Harbour for their own. These had formerly been the bases of the Red Wine Fleet, a serious statement. The aforementioned fleet was making its way around Dawn as we speak. News of a naval battle was to be expected, although it would probably take a while still. The distance was still great and both would most likely scout their opponent first. Even more interesting had been the news about the Iron Fleet. They had been seen passing Lies and going east, no one knew where to. Was there division amongst the Ironborn? Be that as it may, the Ironborn wouldn't have their strongest ships in the coming naval campaign against the Reach, something he quite liked. Both destroying each other would be ideal, although he'd rather see the Red Wines win than the Greyjoys. Tarly could also have moved south for another reason. Reports had come of the Golden Company attacking the Stormlands. What those sellswords were doing there, nobody knew. The Black Fires were all dead to his knowledge, so it made no sense. Although, he had once thought the same could said of male Targaryens and now he had one sleeping in the room next to him. The sellswords seemed to be led by a man named John Connington, a Stormlord who had been friends with Rhaegar. He had fled during the rebellion and many had thought him dead, but apparently not. They had taken multiple castles in the Stormlands, but for now didn't really seem like a threat. Their forces seemed scattered and too few to inflict serious damage for now. Besides, most of the Stormlords had pledged themselves to Tommen after the death of Stannis Baratheon, so another mess for the Lannisters to clean up wasn't entirely a bad thing. The more of their troops scattered around, the easier they were to defeat. Finally, there had also been news from the north. He had received a letter from Alaric, one of his wife's cousins. He had arrived at the wall with 300 troops, as asked, and now he sent back a report. The wildlings who had been scattered on their side of the wall had been dealt with successfully. They had done some damage to the area, although Brandon's gift had already been highly depopulated before that. Most had been scattered in smaller raiding groups of a few hundred or even a few dozens. That way they'd been able to take care of them one by one with minimal losses. The main wildling army had also undertaken a next attack on the wall. His troops had managed to hold them off, together with a few Night Watch members sent from the other castles. The losses had been heavy on both sides. Hodder Umber had died in the fighting, as well as many nobles from the clans. Of the once 3,000-strong force, less than half seemed to remain in fighting condition. Alaric's reinforcements had also lost around a third of their troops and the army was weak, he wrote. The good thing was that over 2,000 Skagasi were on their way to Eastwatch. They would be ferried over in smaller contingents by the Night's Watch small navy. Alaric's letter had also mentioned something else that troubled him. Apparently, his grandfather had started to behave differently in Carhold after Lord Rickard died. He had seemingly started to make small decisions which he had no authority over without Harryon's approval. Nothing major had happened, but the indirect challenge to his brother-in-law's authority was still worrisome. All of this had kept him here in this solar far too much. He had spent hours thinking about the hundreds of questions and uncertainties that presented itself. What would the possible consequences of either an Ironborn or a Red Wine victory be? How could he help to better contain the wildling threat, now and in the future? When would the Vale troops be able to march? He thought about what Tarlis March would mean for the civil war that was brewing in the Reach. Who would he side with? Would it be his liege, Lord Willers Tyrell, or his wife's kin, House Florent? Most of all, he thought about Tywin Lannister and how to finally beat him. He couldn't prepare better than he already had. He knew everything of his army, from the amount of arrows in stock to the size of the future baggage train. He had spent a lot of hours bowed over his maps. He could honestly say that he knew every possible battleground from Riverrun to King's Landing and the advantages or disadvantages they all held. Still, he looked again. The next time the two of them met on the battlefield, he would crush his army and open the road to King's Landing. He would finish this damned war and go back to see his daughter grow up. His plans had been made and ravens had flown to possible allies. Now all they could do was march and hopefully end this. 18 days later. He had finally done it. He had managed to catch up to the Lannister army near the God's-Eye River. 2 weeks of chasing each other and having constant skirmishes finally bore fruit. His gamble had paid off. He had sent his uncle with 300 light horsemen ahead to block any potential crossings of the river, and they had managed to do so. This had given him the opportunity to finally catch up with his enemy's forces. By the time he was close, a quarter of the Lannister force had actually made it across the river. Yet, it was too late for the whole force to get across. Tywin Lannister had had two choices. Either he abandoned part of his army and all of his baggage train, or he pulled his forces back from across the river and faced him in battle. The old lion had apparently chosen the latter, and he was glad for it. He would finally get a chance to end this. He had pushed his army a lot, but his 22,000 men were still eager and ready to fight. They outnumbered the 15,000-strong enemy force significantly, but that was not their biggest advantage. Among Tywin's army was a corps of around 11,000 Westerlanders, elite and hardened troops who had been with since his invasion of the Riverlands. Their skill was great and their discipline a thing to envy, although their morale had probably taken a few hits during the campaign. Yet, he knew they would hold. The other part of the army he wasn't so sure about. His uncle estimated that Tywin had some 4,000 men serving under him that were either made up of sellswords or crownlanders who had all but been coerced into his army all those months ago. If he could break the line, those would be the first to go, and he was counting on it. He felt very confident in his ability to win this battle, yet he wouldn't take any risk. He had halted and waited for 3 hours, less than 3 miles from the enemy. It had served multiple purposes. Firstly, his army had been tired from the forced match. He wanted them to regain part of their strength before giving battle. Secondly, it gave him the benefit of confusing the enemy. By now they would have been waiting on him for hours. They would start to ponder if he would still attack today. Maybe they would rethink not crossing the bridge or even outright attack him. Both were foolish and he would welcome either mistake. Thirdly, and most importantly, he had another surprise up his sleeve. The longer he waited, the more chance he had that his plan actually came to fruition. He would use the Lannisters' own methods against them. That was still a while away, however. For now, his forces started to line up on the field in front of them. Their enemy already present on the other side of it. His plan was quite simple. He would use his advantage in numbers together with the terrain. He had strengthened both his flanks and they would push and envelop the enemy from the sides. From then on, the center would push the Lannisters into the river. They would have nowhere to go, except for the small bridge that would never be able to take them all. If all went well, it would be a complete slaughter. He would welcome it. This elite Westerlander force had brought uncountable amounts of grief on the Riverlands. They sacked Stony September, Stonehenge, Harrenhal, Maidenpool, Pink Maiden and many other holdfasts. They had killed thousands upon thousands of Riverlanders themselves, while tens of thousands had died of starvation and banditry due to their actions. Even more had become homeless and fled north. All of them deserved to pay for it, even if they were only following orders. He waited upon the hill, overlooking the battlefield from on top of his white destrier. The horse had been a new addition that his brother had brought him. The beast was majestic. It had apparently belonged to some reclawed and been wounded after Atlanta. Lord Edmure's horse breeders had been able to restore him to strength, and John had bought him for him as a gift. Many commented what a sight it made, as he sat upon the white war horse in his grey armor. Flanked by grey wind and with his white cloak, made out of fur from northern hares, flowing in the air, he apparently looked like the embodiment of the kings of winter of old. He needed to admit, the play upon his house colors looked amazing, and he thanked John profusely for it. Ice hung from the right side of the warhorse, as he himself held a spear in his hand. He also had a shorter sword at his hip, more appropriate for fighting on horseback. His shield was currently in the hands of his squire, Oliver Free. Many had wanted him to dismiss his friend, on the basis of his name alone. He had refused them all. Oliver had saved his life from his own kinsman. There was no one better and more loyal for the position. As he looked around, his army seemed ready. It had once again assembled in 3 blocks, as he liked it. He looked around to see if the standards of the respective commanders were in place. On the left he saw the white sunburst on a black field high in the sky. Harry On would do as well as his father, he knew. Lord Robert Glover had been appointed as his second-in-command. The older, ruthless man would be a good addition to his brother-in-law's young talent and energy. In the center, the roaring giant of House Umber stood in front of the line. The great Jon always led from the front and he never disappointed when it came to warfare. He himself had chosen his brother Roderick and Lord Flint to serve directly under him and he had agreed. He didn't have to learn the Umberlord anything about choosing his battle commanders. On the right were the Riverlanders, under his uncle Ed Muir's command. His uncle was by far his weakest commander, yet he couldn't refuse him the position due to his rank. Luckily, the new Lord Tully had learned a lot from this war and would do decently on the job. His friend Sir Ronald Vance, the heir to Atlanta, had been appointed as his second. The knight showed great promise and the death of his younger brothers gave him an energy and determination few could rival. 2 cavalry forces had assembled on both sides. One under the command of the new Lord Bolton, the other under his brother. To his surprise, none of the Riverlanders had even uttered a word about serving under a bastard. It really showed how far they had come and how Jon had won over the men in the army. He was glad for it, as there was no one he trusted more. The archers in front were still under the command of Lord Deddings. The Riverlord was almost of an age with his late father but showed the energy of a man 10 years his junior. He had been in great spurts for the last 2 weeks. When asked why, he had simply answered that revenge would soon be his. All remembered the story of how the Lannisters had killed his pregnant wife and daughter and none could blame the man for those feelings. All he cared for was if he would do his job. In response to that concern, the Riverlord had just smiled and said, "My archers will shoot so many arrows into their army, their knights will look like a group of dead porcupines." He himself had once again taken control of the reserve cavalry. Lady Mormont was one again leading the reserve infantry, seeing as she had done a great job at Atlanta. He trusted all of his commanders. Victory would soon be in their grasp. He took a deep breath, while looking up at the sky. "This one's for you, Father. For you and all the brave men that lost their lives in this war. Today we try to end this." He looked back at the army and gave his signal. Soon, the horns blared the marching signal. 22,000 men immediately came into action as he himself urged his horse slowly forward. Not long after, they were in range of the enemy force and archers started shooting at both sides. His archer corps was larger than that of the enemy and they had the same amount of experience by now. As such, he was glad to let this continue for as long as possible. The Lannisters also seemed to realize this, as trumpets were heard from the other side of the field. Seeing the enemy infantry lines move forward with such discipline was a sight to behold. Although he had his doubts about the old lion's so-called tactical prowess, his leadership was still an incredible feat. He waited until the Lannisters had crossed almost half the distance, while being peppered with arrows, before giving another order. The horn blows, that signaled for the archers to pull back, were quickly followed up with the order for his infantry to charge. He looked proudly on the sight as thousands of men started running at the enemy within mere seconds. The standard of House Umber soon disappeared in the fighting, as the center clashed with the enemy pike line. His flanks also engaged the Lannisters' spear walls and men-at-arms. Before any order could be given, both cavalry flanks at the sides started moving. He smirked, both Dom and Jon knew what they were doing. They quickly tied down much of the heavy Lannister cavalry on the flanks, as his infantry pushed theirs hard. With both armies equally matched, he simply had to wait for his plan to unfold. He didn't have to wait long. Soon a messenger ran up towards him. "Your Grace, banners have been spotted across the river. Another force is preparing to cross the bridge." "What do their banners display?" he asked calmly. "They seem to be from Cracklaw's Point, Your Grace." The bare paw of House Brune was seen among them. The messenger replied. Some of the men around him looked uneasy at that. Enemy reinforcements were never a good thing. They looked even more uneasy, as he just smiled in response. At last, Sir Wendell Marndaly asked him why he was smiling. Because I have been in contact with the houses of Cracklaw Point. They will not reinforce the Lannisters, they'll attack their rear when ready. Now most of the eyes of his battle guard almost popped out of their sockets. You had this planned all along? Owen Norrie exclaimed in surprise. I did. I thought taking a page out of Tywin's book would be fitting after Atlanta. I told the main commanders this morning, so they'll know what to expect. I won't leave this battle to chance friends. I want the Lannister army broken. He responded calmly, but his voice steeled at the last words. He thought about his father and all the friends he had lost. He would lose no more if he could help it. His friends all grinned grimly, as they realized what was about to happen. All seemed to prepare themselves in their own way, clearly trusting his judgment. He sent orders to Lady Mormont to join the right flank, as he rallied the cavalry and rode to the left. Domeric's force was stuck in a fierce cavalry fight against the enemy horse and he decided to reinforce them. Grey Wind charged in first, taking down 2 riders from House Serret. After his loyal direwolf, 1,500 riders charged in. The impact was immense, and his forces quickly took the upper hand. The fighting still proved tough. One knight from an unknown house charged at him, but the presence of Grey spooked the knight's horse. After that it wasn't difficult to break through his defenses because of it. His lance quickly found its way into the man's upper leg and a few quick flashes of his sword finished the man off. After that, a rider from House Payne attacked him. They had exchanged more than a few blows, as they circled around each other. When one of his guards attacked the man from the other side, he saw his change. The man deflected Robin Flint's blow with his shield, but this left his side open. A nasty cut connected and severely wounded the man and Flint's axe finished the rest. He tried to not get into the thick of the fighting this time, as he had to watch how the battle unfolded. After a while, he saw what he had been hoping for. Tywin and his reserve cavalry charged toward him, leaving his archer line and rear completely exposed. He immediately shouted at some of cavalry to reform and he managed to get hundreds of them in line. They lined up and rode out to break the charge of the Westerlander Knights, a thing Grey Wind was particularly good at. Yet, the charge was half-hearted as a big portion of the enemy reserve suddenly stopped in their tracks. He couldn't worry about that yet, as he to deflect a mace on his shield and redirect a lance aimed at his head. He exchanged sword blows with a knight sworn to House Morland and received a small wound on his left arm from a mounted soldier wearing the red of House Lannister. Grey Wind darted around him, biting of the legs of enemy horses and killing of their riders afterwards. Suddenly the enemy tried to disengage. He managed to hit a retreating outrider with a killing blow on the back of his head, but the other one successfully pulled back. His guard quickly pulled around him, as he looked at what was happening to the battle and grinned. In the distance he could see how the enemy archer line was scattered, while Lady Mormont had managed to break the enemy left that consisted of mostly Crownlanders. Before his eyes, he saw how his right enveloped the enemy center, while the houses of Cracklaw Point charged the rear of the enemy right. Total chaos erupted and in an instant the whole enemy army was surrounded. Looking back towards the enemy reserve, he saw the old lion and looked into his eyes. The Lannister lord looked back at him, clearly realizing the battle was lost. As he grinned victoriously, the Lannister patriarch suddenly started to shout orders. To his shock the cavalry group started turning away from the battlefield. He's fleeing, he realized. He's leaving his whole army to die here. No, he screamed. Men to me. He shouted. He gathered hundreds of cavalrymen around him and rode to where Domeric's detachment had just beaten the enemy flank. Riders of the north with me. Tywin Lannister is escaping. He shouted. Soon, hundreds more joined his charge, as they started to pursue the Lannisters. Looking around him, he estimated he had some 2,000 riders with him. Tywin probably had around the same. He pushed his men and horses in hot pursuit and they quickly rode further away from the battlefield. They managed to strike down some stragglers, but the main cavalry force eluded them. They chased after them for at least a mile, until the Lannister cavalry tried to form up on a hill in front of him. His own men slowed down, looking to him for a command. His anger and drive to capture Tywin were quickly taking over. He wanted to catch that man and end this once and for all. He was about to order his men to charge when Tor violently pulled his shoulder back. What are you doing? His friend screamed at him. He looked at him in surprise. Killing Tywin Lannister, what are you doing? Making sure you're not killed. Look at that hill, Robb, he's waiting for you. Look behind us, we are too far away from the main line. Their horses are fresher than ours and it's the elite heavy cavalry of the Lannisters, we will be slaughtered. His friend screamed, clearly concerned. If we let him go, this war still won't be over. We can end it all now. He responded grimly, turning back towards his enemy. Killing you could still win the war for them. Gods be damned, think Red Stuck. My brother didn't die to protect you, only for you to throw away your life and cause for nothing more than stupid revenge. Their army is broken. They are done, let him go. The way to King's Landing lies open and there is nothing he can do about it. Tos screamed. The mention of Ed made him pause. He owed it to him not to throw away his life, that was true. Suddenly Domeric raced towards him. Robb, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here. Tywin's going to charge us. He screamed. He looked around and saw that he was right, the Lannisters were slowly riding down the hill. He had to make one of the most difficult decisions in his life, give up on Tywin or risk everything. In the end, he knew his friends were right. Turn around, men. We have won the battle, let's go sack their camp instead. His men roared in support of this. Being promised easy loot was a lot better than taking a Lannister heavy cavalry charge head-on. He turned his horse and rode away, looking behind him to see the Lannisters quickly stop their pursuit. A few minutes later, they rode back onto the battlefield. What he saw there surprised him. He had expected the battle to be long over, yet what he saw was that some 2,000 Lannister heavy infantry and pikes were still holding out. Amongst them stood a single Lannister banner. Sir Kevan. Tywin left his own brother here to die. He was just about to charge his men in, when he saw the proud Lannister lion go down. Soon, it was all over and the Lannisters surrendered. Not much later, he found himself in his command tent, surrounded by his lords. Most of them were very familiar face, but a few, the lords of Cracklaw Point, were new additions to the council. All of those had just sworn fealty to him on very generous terms in front of the army. He had offered them an amazing deal by Raven a few weeks earlier, and it had won him the day with minimal casualties. It had been more than worth it. All of houses of Cracklaw Point would be freed from the nominal overlordship that House Celtigar claimed over them. They would be exempted from taxes in his kingdom for 50 years. Although the latter was an extreme clause, the poor lands didn't bring in much anyway. Some of the houses would get some lands of the upper crown landlords. All of them were promised again the same prestige their houses had enjoyed under the dragons. They would never be looked down upon anymore. He had insisted that their First Men heritage would be a boon among his people, instead of the curse it had proven to be with many Southerners. They would also be their own separate entity, falling under no other house than the Starks. After this generous offer, they had quickly flocked to his banner and his plot had worked perfectly. Tywin Lannister had expected them to join his ranks and had left his rear right open. Still, the victory felt foul in his mouth without the capture of Lord Tywin. My lords, we have scored another victory, but this war is far from over. Lord Tywin has escaped with a little over 2,000 elite horsemen. He will most likely retreat across the Gold Road into the Westerlands. There, some of his cousins are already trying to rebuild an army. This won't be the end of the Lannisters, he said, still more than a little annoyed that the patriarch of House Lannister got away. All of his lords looked at him in disbelief. You can't be serious, Your Grace. We just destroyed the Lannister army completely. Sir Willis Marndaly exclaimed. Of the once proud and disciplined force of 25,000, now only 2,000 and a handful of garrisons remain. All of the Crownlander nobles still loyal to Tommen have been captured and their houses will surrender. The way to King's Landing is open. Maybe even equally important is the number of noble prisoners we captured. We have members of all Western houses in our custody, for most of them that includes the Lord or Heir. We have broken the might of the West here today. Tywin can train as many peasant boys as he wants. He will never be able to replenish these troops, nor will he be able to protect King's Landing from our wrath. With the Tyrells gone, we have all but won the war here on the field. The Marndaly countered his views. He looked at Sir Willis and thought about his words. It was true he wouldn't be able to find any more heavy cavalry to replenish this force. In addition, he knew that replenishing his elite archers or pikesmen would cost Tywine at least a year. Maybe Sir Willis was right. Besides, it was true that King's Landing lay open to them. They would rest here for a while before marching towards it. You mentioned noble captives. Who do we have? He asked calmly, trying to get a hold on the situation again. Everybody, the whole Westerlands. The Great Jon laughed. Most of his nobles joined in, as they apparently had no other way to describe it. As much as he liked the enthusiasm, the lack of actual information irked him. Luckily, he could always count on Sir Brynden to help. I have arranged for a list to be made, Your Grace. Do you wish me to read it to you? He smiled towards his great-uncle. Please, uncle. He motioned for him to continue. We have captured Lords Jason Sarsfield, Titus Broom, Damon Harmel, Robin Morland, Lewis Leiden, Limond Serrit and the new Lord Alyn Stackspear, late Lord Selman's second son. Both the old Lord Stackspear and his heir died in the fighting. The Tully Knight started. He immediately interrupted him. We captured all of them today. Yes, Your Grace. In my opinion the most important of them are Lords Leiden and Serrit. Both of their lands are vast and wealthy and have been free from harm during the war. I believe it is there that Lord Tywine will try to recruit more troops once he arrives in the Westerlands. The same goes for another prisoner we captured, Sir Cedric Payne. He is the heir to House Payne and will be as valuable as both of the two aforementioned lords, I believe. What do you propose? You want to get them on our side? He asked his most experienced commander. Yes, Your Grace. If at all possible, I would. Tywine has lost both of the armies he sent out 1.5 years ago. He has lost both of his sons and now his last remaining brother and most loyal commander. He will have lost the respect and loyalty of most of his nobles by now. Maybe more important is the fact that, without an army, they won't fear him as much anymore. If you combine that with the fact that we have already taken some of their families prisoner and the threat the Ironborn pose for others' lands, I think a lot of them will defect or at least declare neutrality after some negotiations. The Tully Knight explained. He had also been wondering about the enemy's morale, as his uncle knew. Maybe this could be the point when the lords of the Westerlands finally abandoned Tywine. He looked towards all the lords present. Do you think they would turn on him? Will civil war break out in the Westerlands? I don't know, Your Grace. If they depose him, who would they raise as lord? None of the lords will give it to any of the others. A Lannister has always ruled those lands, only a Lannister will be able to unite them. Lord Jon Osbracken mentioned. I agree, Your Grace. Lord Cale Vance spoke up. His succession is unclear, to say the least. His most logical heir is Tommen, but the boy is already king and will soon be threatened by us in King's Landing. Cersea's situation is much the same. The daughter Myrcella is in Dorne for the moment, pleading her case would be nearly impossible. The other possible heirs are Willem and Martin Lannister, Kevan's two remaining sons. The problem is that both of them are in our custody. That only leaves Kevan's young daughter, Jenna Lannister's free children or a few distant Lannister cousins to contend with Tywine. However, Jenna Lannister is firmly loyal to her brother and is in control of Casterly Rock. She controls her small niece and most of the Lannister cousins have either died in the war or are still very loyal and of no significance. I don't think the Westerlords will be able to rally behind anyone, because there is no one to rally behind. It's true. Besides, who will gather the remaining lords? Many of them have died, most of the others are in our custody. Those that remain have family members that have been taken captive. All remaining Western commanders are now in our custody, with the capture of Lords Leiden, Ser Erit and Sir Adam Marbrand. Tywine will use the lack of challengers to try and unite all the inexperienced boys into a new army. Best we can do is to try to deter them to stay out of the conflict for now, like we did with House Prester. Harry added. Most of his lords agreed to that and he nodded. I will speak to some of the captured lords and nobles. However, I think it is more important now to focus on King's Landing. If the capital were to fall, together with Tommen Waters and Cersei Lannister, the Westerlords will be much easier to persuade to drop Tywine. Until then, there is nothing we can do. We don't have the men to both capture the city and invade the Westerlands at the same time, so turning the lords isn't our priority for now. We let the army rest here for 3 days, after that we march to take the head of Cersei Lannister. This was met roaring approval from his lords, especially the northern ones. Since the death of Joffrey and Tyrion, most put the blame of his father's death on her. All were eager to avenge their former liege lord. He would gladly give them that satisfaction. Your Grace, if I may. There are still other important captives that haven't been discussed.